All right. Welcome everyone, and we'll continue to welcome people as they come in. So, very happy that you all can be here with us. Of course, it ended up being like the super gorgeous day when everybody wants to go outside and play outside. So we do appreciate you being here with us as you can. So my name is Elaine. Do we have intros in this
We
time
do,
place for
yeah.
intro in the slides? Okay, so I'll go ahead and share the slides, and then we'll start talking about all that stuff. And is it going to do what I want it to do? All
Yes.
right. So yeah, my name is Elaine Evans, one of the program leaders here for the Pollinator Ambassadors. I am an extension educator and researcher based at the University of Minnesota Bee Lab. I got interested in pollinators long, long ago. First, I was kind of just got interested in nature, and as soon as I started looking at how nature worked, insects really drew me in because they were clearly so important. I quickly went to just conservation with insects because they're doing so many different things. Pollinators ended up being a really good way to try to hook people into insect conservation. So I do have this always have this urge to kind of broaden things out, and pollinators are a really good way to do that because they connect so many different systems.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. My name is Elise Bernstein. I am the other program leader for Pollinator Ambassadors. My title is Community Engaged Researcher with the Bee Squad. So the Bee Squad is the outreach and education arm of the University of Minnesota Bee Lab. So my role is, about half research, half outreach. So doing a lot of pollinator education around the Twin Cities. And then I'm involved in research that involves a public participation component. So doing a lot of work with volunteers across Minnesota. I have been interested in insects and spending time outdoors for, most of my life. I've been working with the Bee Lab since 2021, and it's been a great opportunity for me to kind of combine my interests in insects and the outdoors and science communication as well. I studied environmental science, policy, and management when I was an undergrad, which is where I really fell in love with trees, which is kind of what really ended or helped me end up at working with the Bee Lab and having this interest in pollinators, because pollinators are also a great way of showing kind of how everything is connected. But I'm excited to meet you all and go through this Pollinator Ambassadors training today.
All right, so in the chat, one person already did this, letting us know where you are zooming in from and what your favorite spring activity is. So we got Chanhassen, Plymouth, Moorhead, Caledonia, New Brighton, Arizona, Rochester, St. Paul, Waconia. Nisswa, wow, we're covering a lot of different parts of the state. Big Lake, Crookston, Minnetonka, Hanley Falls. Wow, this is great.
Hmm.
Duluth, Shoreview. Yeah, one of our things we get really excited about is getting coverage across the state because there's lots of lots of people that we're not able to get to ourselves. So that's one of our big goals with Pollinator Ambassadors. To have people watching for spring blooms, wa taking walks, biking, ooh, rock hunting. Yeah, and Duluth's a good place to do that. Nature walks, planning what new native plants, new natives to plant, reserving the summer camp trips. Yep, you got to get in early on those. So yeah, good to hear where you all are from and what you're doing. We're going to do a quick little Word cloud. If you can either scan that, or I think Elise is going to get she got the link there. If you go to that link, you should be able to enter in one word to describe yourself. I am going to hopefully be switching my screen over, and you can see that, right? The stuff coming in. So we've
Yep.
got the words starting to come in. I bet hard went with working. Ooh, friendly is starting to win out. And curious.
Seeing some other words come into the Zoom chat as well. Some people say a nature lover, energetic. I think we've kind of found a few themes here.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Yeah, these are all great characteristics for our pollinator ambassadors.
I think I'm taking over
And
here.
you're taking over. I will stop sharing and let you share.
Awesome. All right. Can you see the slide?
Yeah, you just need to do it in slideshow. There you go.
Okay. Awesome. So, just a few quick orders of business before we keep moving on with everything. As we're presenting, feel free to pop questions in the Zoom chat. Elena and I can get to those as we're presenting. We also have a few seasoned pollinator ambassadors in the meeting today that can help with answering your questions as we go along. We know this is a really, really long time to be on Zoom, so we've tried to schedule a lot of breaks throughout the day so you can get up, use the bathroom, and then we've also scheduled quite a few discussions so you'll have a chance to chat with some other ambassadors, get a chance to know people that might be in your area, also doing pollinator education. That said, if you need to step away for a moment, use the bathroom, take a break, go ahead and do so as needed. We're recording this whole Zoom so you can review things after the fact if you have any questions. So, kind of just a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. So, this morning, we are going to go over the history of Pollinator Ambassadors, kind of how this program came to be, talk about volunteer qualifications and expectations for participating in the Pollinator Ambassadors program. We'll talk about how to use Canvas, which is the online training portal for pollinator ambassadors. We will give an introduction to the Pollinator Toolkit. So, the Pollinator Toolkit is all of the activities and um, posters and things that you'll be provided as a pollinator ambassador. Then we'll take a break at 12:30. We'll do a sort of 45-minute virtual lunch together so we can all grab our lunches, hop back on Zoom and get a chance to get to know each other. And then this afternoon from 1:15 to 3, we'll go over the basics of volunteering, talk about how to find events as a pollinator ambassador, the basics of tabling, how to be a good public speaker, answering difficult questions from the public, and then we'll talk about promoting inclusion in your volunteer work. So to dive in here at the beginning, I don't know why this slide. There we go. Okay, so kind of to summarize, things that we're going to learn this morning are the requirements to become a pollinator ambassador, how to use Canvas, how to use the Pollinator Toolkit, and most importantly, what are the 4 actions to help pollinators. So by lunchtime, these are the topics that you should feel like you have learned. So, to start with the history of pollinator ambassadors, there has really been a pretty significant growing public concern about pollinator decline. And here at the University of Minnesota Bee Lab, we receive lots of requests for pollinator education, often far more requests than we're actually able to meet. So to bridge this gap, we have created the Pollinator Ambassadors program. Pollinator Ambassadors started with the creation of the Pollinator Education Toolkit, and when this toolkit was developed, 250 kits were distributed to educators across Minnesota. The second sort of iteration of Pollinator Ambassadors was this program called Pollinators in the Science Classroom that trained high school science teachers to be really experts in pollinator education, doing lots of pollinator education with their students. Then we worked with youth pollinator ambassadors. So 80 high school students were trained to become pollinator experts to be able to do pollinator outreach in their community. And now we have shifted to this iteration of Pollinator Ambassadors, our volunteer program. And this phase of things began in 2024. So we are training adult volunteers to become pollinator education experts by providing them with guidance as well as outreach materials. So after you complete your training as a pollinator ambassador, you will receive a pollinator toolkit. So you have all of the materials and things that you need to be able to do outreach confidently within your community. So what is a pollinator ambassador? What defines a pollinator ambassador? So these are volunteers who understand the importance of pollinators to our food, agricultural, and ecological systems and the threats that pollinators are facing. Pollinator ambassadors know the action steps to help others help pollinators. Pollinator ambassadors actively learn and share what they know, and they do this through presentations, writing, art, or other creative ways. They are advocating for pollinators through education, investigation, and action. So, what qualifies you to be a pollinator ambassador? You need to be enthusiastic about insects. Pollinators are really important insects that are very fascinating, and having that enthusiasm for them already, is important for participating. You need to be committed to completing online training. So, all of the training for pollinator ambassadors can be completed online. And then committed to presenting at 5 pollinator events every year. And we'll talk a little bit more about what these events will look like. Some additional helpful qualifications that can help you succeed as a pollinator ambassador, but aren't necessarily required. Having any experience with public speaking or event coordination can be really helpful as you're volunteering. Any experience already working in science or with insects, that's a great basis for learning more. And being responsive to criticism and excited to improve your skills are great ways or are there other helpful qualifications for beginning the Pollinator Ambassadors training. So to begin the online training course in Canvas, which we'll talk about shortly, we ask folks to apply to participate in the program. This just helps us get a little bit of background information, about what your background is, if you have experience already, just so we're kind of understanding where you're coming from. So requirements for volunteers, once you've been accepted and completed your Pollinator Ambassadors training or as you're completing your training, the first requirement is that you will have to pass the individual quizzes and cumulative exam that are included within our Canvas page. There are 13 required modules. We're covering the content that's in modules 1, 2, and 3 on Canvas in this training today. The second requirement is after you finish those online modules, we have all of our volunteers give a really brief practice presentation to Elaine and myself, about 5 minutes, to demonstrate your public speaking skills. So you'll choose a slide presentation from the Pollinator Toolkit and present that to us over Zoom. And then once you're awarded your Pollinator Toolkit, we expect our ambassadors to exhibit at or host 5 pollinator events annually. We do have a volunteer code of conduct because we want our pollinator ambassadors, to be creating a culture of respect. We expect our pollinator ambassadors to promote a spirit of inclusion and welcome participation from individuals of all backgrounds. We expect our pollinator ambassadors to be responsible for complying with reasonable requests for accommodation. So we really want pollinator education to be as accessible as possible and meet the needs of lots of different people. We expect our pollinator ambassadors to communicate honestly, openly, and respectfully with their fellow ambassadors, program leaders, and the public as well. And then we ask that our pollinator ambassadors do not use any sort of AI technologies while they're completing the online training materials or for content creation. So, kind of going back to everything I just talked about, we're going to sort of break this down step by step. So, the first step of participating as a pollinator ambassador is applying. So, this can be done on our website, on the requirements page. We can paste the link into the Zoom chat. There's a short application form on there, like I said, that just asks a little bit of information about kind of your background and why you're interested in participating in the program. And then I will send you an email that has instructions on how to get started with training. The QR code on the screen here also links to the Pollinator Ambassadors application. The second step is completing virtual training. So this is sort of broken up into three parts. The first part is the content that we're covering this morning. So this is the introduction to Pollinator Ambassadors. So we're talking about, how to apply, how to participate in the program, and then we'll get into some pollinator biology, conservation information, as well as how to use the Pollinator Toolkit. This is also all covered in Module 1 on Canvas. The second part gets into volunteering 101. So, what are the expectations while you're volunteering? What do we expect in terms of how to be a good public speaker? What are questions you might be asked, as well as promoting inclusion in your volunteer work? And this is covered in modules 2 and 3 in Canvas. So, like I said, we're covering this part 1 this morning and part 2 this afternoon. And then the rest of the virtual training is available on Canvas in modules 4 through 13. And there's associated quizzes with those modules as well. And then we also have some optional supplementary modules for added learning about some more complex topics that you might be asked about while you're volunteering as a pollinator ambassador. So if you are attending this virtual training today, you won't need to go through modules 1, 2, and 3 in Canvas once you're admitted into the course, unless you'd like a refresher. So this is a screenshot of our Canvas training page. I will do a walkthrough of this shortly, but Canvas is the online training portal that we use for pollinator ambassadors. If you're part of the Master Naturalists or Master Gardeners programs, they use Canvas as well. It's the platform that most of the university uses. It's where we post all course updates, some event opportunities, and it's also a place to connect with other ambassadors and stay up to date with the most recent training content. So each of the modules has an associated quiz, and you need to score at least 70% on higher or higher on each of the quizzes in order to access the final cumulative exam. So let's do a quick walkthrough of Canvas here. I'm just gonna switch into student mode. Can you see Canvas on the screen? Yes, awesome. Okay, so when you get into Canvas, this is the home page that you will see. The required modules will be listed kind of at the top of the page here, and then the supplementary modules are listed down on this second half. And just as a reminder, everything in the required modules is required for completing your Pollinator Masters training, and everything in the supplementary modules is available kind of after you finish the required portion if you're interested in getting some more information about some of those more complicated topics. So when you get into Canvas, you can start at Module 1 and go to the introduction to the training content. Within Canvas, you'll have access to our volunteer handbook as well as a series of training videos. So the training we're doing today, since we're recording it, we will post the updated videos into Canvas here. Another great thing about Canvas is these discussion boards, which are embedded into the modules. We have a discussion board within that first module where our ambassadors have the opportunity to introduce themselves, get a chance to, connect with other ambassadors across Minnesota, find out what sort of common interests you might have with other ambassadors. We also have a discussion board that's a place to ask questions. Of course, you can reach out to Elaine or myself through email anytime, but you can post questions to this discussion board as well. And this is also where you can access the virtual Pollinator Toolkit. So the Pollinator Toolkit, is available as a physical kit that you'll receive after you complete your Pollinator Ambassador training, but all of the activities are available as slide sets or PDFs online as well. I'm going to go back to the home page here, and we'll look at one of the other modules. So if we go to module 4, there is a short video here, so you'll have a chance to watch the video, review some of the questions, and then there is a short quiz that will cover the content that we go over in that module. So each of the modules are kind of set up that way, where there's a short video, maybe some questions or learning objectives, and then a really short quiz. So everything that you need to access through Canvas can be found through this home page, through the required modules, but you can also navigate using this column on the left-hand side here. The announcements page is one that's great to check. We post reminders about upcoming trainings or events, or other program updates to the announcements page. I believe when you register for Canvas, you should be able to indicate that you'd like to receive emails when we post announcements to the course as well. So you should be able to get those through your email as well. You can also navigate to the discussion posts through this column on the left-hand side, so you can see all of the discussions that are available through all of the modules. One discussion that I'd like to highlight is the event board here. So this is a place where you can connect with other ambassadors. We will occasionally post event opportunities here as well, but if you are hosting an event or setting up an event and would like help from another ambassador, this is a great place to post that so you can find others to connect with. One final piece of Canvas that I would like to highlight really quickly before we get back to the slides is our final module that's available at the top half of the page. So after module 13, we have this module called resource sharing. This takes you to either this discussion board here where you can post about a resource that you'd like to share with other ambassadors. So if you have photos or content that you've developed yourself and you'd like to share them with other ambassadors, you can post that here, as well as sharing things to this folder. So we have this shared folder where our pollinator ambassadors are able to share content that they've created, or any sort of tips or things that they've learned as they're volunteering. So that's kind of the overview of using Canvas. We are always happy to help answer questions about using Canvas. There's also this little Get Help tab at the top that will provide you with some resource for reaching out to the extension learning technologies people that can also help navigate any technical difficulties. All right, and I think we are at a time to pause here for any questions, and then I'll turn things back over to Elaine.
There have been some good questions going in the chat. Um, so maybe just in case people aren't multitasking and keeping track of stuff there, they're asking about if we're kind of identifying ambassadors by community or county. So we do try to connect people with events that are in their regions, as well as trying to encourage you to connect with other ambassadors that are nearby, so you can collaborate together on events. Also, another question was about ongoing access to Canvas. So we kind of create a new Canvas each year, but you have access to that, ongoing, throughout your time as an ambassador. As long as you're active, you'll be put into the new Canvas, and we'll have access. We do. Occasionally need to update things. We are part of the reason, one of our other kind of core tenets of the Pollinator Ambassador program is keeping things up to date with the best science. So that does develop over time. So we do try to we do sometimes need to update content or add new content as new research comes out and we learn new things.
I see there's a new question in the chat. Well, we have a list of ambassadors along with their contact info and location. We are not currently sharing all of the contact information for other pollinator ambassadors. That event board and places on Canvas are a great place to start to get connected with other ambassadors. Typically because we have all of your location information, I will reach out to everyone that's kind of in the same geographic area. And we've definitely had ambassadors kind of attend events together and get connected that way. We're trying to think of the best ways moving forward to make sure that our ambassadors are all connected to each other. So that's something that we're hoping to have available, some sort of place or group to connect and collaborate based on location. So stay tuned for that.
And yeah, Scott is asking a good question here. I'm curious about the background of today's participants. If you're teachers or um, a, a want-to-be master gardener, a master gardener. If people want to just put in the chat if you if you have any of those kind of relevant backgrounds that you want to share. It's fine if you're haven't had experience doing those kind of things and are just getting into it here. You just need to have those enthusiasms. But a lot of times we have a couple of master gardeners. We usually have a blend of people who are doing these things other places as well.
Oh, there's a great question. I'm from the northern region and have noticed that there may not be as many events as in the metro area. Would collaborations with other pollinator ambassadors be allowed, especially if you might have to share an event? Yes, absolutely. So you're totally welcome to collaborate with other pollinator ambassadors. We're going to get a lot more into events and things this afternoon, so I might save some of this for as we get really in depth with that later. The only thing, if you are sharing an event with another ambassador, is the way that it's being reported. So we do ask that you keep track of the number of people you're engaging with at your events. So if you're doing an event with another ambassador, just making sure that only one person is reporting that, so we're not double counting any efforts. But like I said, we'll get a lot more into kind of events and how to find events and what those events look like this afternoon.
I lost. Okay, one second. I just need to activate this next poll. I have three different screens, which can be helpful, but also can sometimes make things a little confusing. All right, we have another poll, which is actually the same link as the last one, but at least if you want to stick that in the chat too. Oh wait, not this one. It's the next one. Boop, 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 boop. Uh-oh. Hold on. All right, here we go. Hopefully. Okay. In one word, how do you feel about pollinators? Okay, am I showing?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Sorry about my technical problems, but thank you. Thank you for your patience. Lots of different things going on. So I love all the different kind of aspects of things, passionate, enchanted, enamored, fascinated. Um, and then there's things like, impressed and grateful. Some people also worried, but also hopeful. Yeah, a lot of different things going on in pollinator world, and I can relate to all of these. Um, I definitely bounce between worried and hopeful at different times. I thank you for sharing those. Let me get back to our slides now. Oops, hold on. Oh my goodness. All right. So now we are going to start digging into the Pollinator Toolkit. So the Pollinator Toolkit is this set of games and activities about pollinators. Boop, boop. So they come as a physical kit with different pieces, as well as a digital kit, which has presentations. You'll see pieces of many of these presentations today. And we're going to give you an introduction to some of what's going on here. You'll learn more about them in the modules as well. So we're trying to give you kind of extra background about what's going on within these activities, so that when you get questions from the public, that you have the background to be able to answer those. So a lot of we start out with some background on pollinators, why we care about pollinators. So it's roughly 80% of plants that rely on animals for pollination. And that ends up being happening from animals that are moving pollen around. So pollen is moved from the anthers, where the pollen is being produced, onto stigmas, and then that pollen grows down and will fertilize the into the ovules, and then the ovary forms around that and produces the fruit. So this can happen by animals. It can also happen from wind, water. So that other 20% that's not being moved around by animals is moving from these other ways, abiotic ways that are not involving animals at all. So here's kind of a more close up of what's going on here. When pollen lands on a stigma that is receptive to that pollen, then that pollen will grow a pollen tube down and will go down into the ovule to form a seed. And then that the fruit is what is appearing around that. And I'm gonna do just like a quick little demonstration with this flower dissection, which is something that you can do easily as a demonstration too, if you have a group that's really interested in pollination. These I'm just gonna hold do this holding things up close to the camera and hope that that's good enough. These lilies that you can get, from grocery stores, a lot of different places showing selling flowers. These are great because they have kind of all the parts are kind of big and easy to find. If you dig into flowers, they can get complicated, but these are really easy. You can easily see what the petals are. Um, when you can also go up close and see the clearly see the anthers that have the pollen on top. And if you remove all of those, you're left with the stigma, which is then growing down into this area here where the ovule is. And oops, I leaned on on my arrow. Close your eyes. Um, I have done like you do on a cooking show, and I've prepared a little ovule that I've cut in half, which it's difficult to see here, but you can see kind of the different color in the center. If you're doing this, so I just took a razor blade and I just cut right down the center of that ovule and then or ovary. And then if you have even just a little hand lens, you can see the little ovules, the little things that will become seeds in the center of this. And then what I like to do too is then if you're doing a demonstration like this, and then if you have a piece of fruit like an apple, you can see here these little parts of the apple are where the flower used to be. So all that little shriveled up stuff there are petals. And you can see how that goes directly down to this center where this where the ovary is, where the seeds are, those little ovules. You can see that whole center of the plant where, the pollen grew right down in there and fertilized and made those seeds happen. And then the rest of the fruit grew around there as protection for the seeds. So that's a nice just demonstration with easily found stuff that you can show that connection between pollination that's happening in the flowers, those different flower parts, and the food that you're eating. So our pollinator plate activity is based around this idea of trying to understand the impact of pollinators on the food that we eat. So there is a lot of variation in plants and how they deal with pollination. So there's some plants that don't produce any fruit at all if they don't have pollinators to move pollen between plants. Other flowers will still produce fruit without pollinators. So some plants are self-pollinated. So even if pollen just moves within one flower, which can happen from just being like rustled in the wind, things like that, they can produce fruit. And others will be able to produce some fruit, but it can be small, kind of weirdly shaped, slower to ripen. And one thing to think of too, besides just that direct the piece of our plant-based diet, there's other things like dairy and meat that can be affected by pollinators because bees are and other pollinators can be very important for pollinating forage plants for dairy cows and for animals that are producing meat. So having those bees there making more alfalfa, really nutritious forage, can also impact dairy and meat production. So we're going to go through a few examples of these pollinator plates, and we're going to use the chat again. So please do put your answers in the chat as we go through this. And so we're going to start out with almonds here. If there were no pollinators, what would we have left on this plate? Would we have no almonds? Would we have some almonds? Would we have all the almonds? Nada, nothing, zilch. Yep. So almonds are one of these foods that are completely dependent on pollinators to move pollen to be able to produce. All right, here is cranberry juice. If there were no pollinators, what would be left of the glass? Full glass, partial glass, nothing. Some juice. Yep, so like wind can move some pollen around, some amount left. So there is generally researchers showing that some cranberry fruits can be produced even if insects aren't there moving it around. I worked on a cranberry pollination project back in the day, and at that time, some of the growers were trying out. Were seeing if they could just bring in helicopters to make a lot of wind and move a lot of pollen around, and it did not work as well as bees. It worked some, but these cranberries do need insects to move pollen around. But we'd still get some. So here we're getting more complicated. We've got a bowl of ice cream. So we can think about, what's going into ice cream, what would be left here. Some ice cream, a little. So acknowledging those cows, milk produced by the cows that are eating the clover that needs pollination. So um, they can, I mean, so we know that, like stuff like alfalfa and some of that other forage that bees pollinate is really nutritious, but they can eat other grasses and other plants besides those like alfalfas and clovers. Um, so we do expect there would be a reduction. We can also think about the flavors. So if we're thinking about, what are the other flavors that are going into the ice cream and how dependent are those on pollinators? So we've got things like vanilla and chocolate and strawberry here that those flavors can all be tied back to pollinators as well. All right, this is something that's very important for many people. So coffee. How would the world run if there were no pollinators to pollinate our coffee? What would be left here? Full cup, half cup, partial cup, none, nothing. Yeah. Some emotional reactions here. So coffee is another one of these that they can sometimes self-pollinate, but insect pollinators really do improve production. So there'd be some coffee likely be more expensive, not as high a quality. Okay, another complicated one where we've got all these layers. Pizza, we've got crust sauce, cheese, veggies on there. What are we going to have left? There wouldn't be any fun left. Just some bread, some crust of bread and such. Yeah, so we'd have crust, some cheese. So tomatoes are um, one of these fruits that we know do rely on bees. They do this buzz pollination with tomatoes, which is covered somewhere in your training. Same with peppers. We already talked about cheese. So, we have something to eat, but it gets kind of boring. So we do have a whole video that kind of goes into explaining, through this whole set to get into details with it. That's all in Module 4. One of the things that I really like about the pollinator plate, the way that we have it set up is it is pretty easy to tier to different age groups. So that's something we've tried to do with a lot of our activities, because you can, we have used these activities with with, 3-year-olds. We've used them with teenagers, with adults, kind of trying to hit those different age ranges. Um, the everybody can relate to food, and we've tried to have these nice visual representations so that it can be just, you can just look at what's there and learn the lesson just from looking at the pictures. You can also read if you're ready to do that stuff that's kind of more in depth.
Really quick, I'm going to jump in to test your pollinator plate knowledge. We have a poll question for you. Which of these crops does not rely on pollinators to increase yields? Is it blueberries, pumpkins, potatoes, or apples? Seeing most of our votes for potatoes so far. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to end the poll. Those of you who said potatoes are correct. Potatoes do not rely on insect pollinators in order to increase crop yields.
All right. So in addition to just that food on your plate, we we really want people to be aware of those kind of broader impacts of pollinators too. And like there might be people that are happy eating potatoes, potatoes and bread. Um, I love eating potatoes and bread. But pollinators really are this have this bigger connection to the whole ecosystem. So they're helping to those plants that they're pollinating are helping to feed and house creatures. Those creatures are feeding other creatures. They're helping to maintain soil health, water quality, and so pollinators really are these connectors that are making our whole ecosystems really function well because when we do have those healthy and diverse pollinator populations. So it's still me, right, Elise? Up to yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You just want me, just interrupt me. So after we've talked about why pollinators are important, why we should care about them, we have some information about who pollinators are. So we have this whole pollinator diversity activity, and so we talk a lot about bees. So we're in a bee lab, but bees, part of the reason why we do that is they do tend to be really important pollinators. So bees are really focusing on flowers for all their food. They collect pollen to feed their young. They move more pollen than a lot of other pollinators, but there are still other really important pollinators out there. Flies are a lot of times in really high numbers that they can be really effective pollinators of a lot of different plants. Butterflies and moths tend to fly farther than a lot of other pollinators. So when plant communities need to maintain genetic diversity across the landscape, butterflies and moths can be really important connectors there. Wasps are also really important pollinators, and besides being pollinators, they also do a lot of pest control. So there's all these different values that these different pollinators have. Beetles you'll see on flowers a lot. They were among the first insects to pollinate flowers. So historically, it's a very important relationship between beetles and flowers. Birds do sometimes pollinate. In Minnesota, we have hummingbirds that are pollinators. Bats can be really important in deserts and tropical systems, but in Minnesota, we don't have any bats that are pollinators. Bats are really cool, but not pollinators here. So going into insects a bit more detail for, we're talking about all these insect pollinators, what makes an insect. So insects have these exoskeletons. So they have this hard layer on the outside. Insects all have the three body parts, head, thorax, and abdomen. They have three pairs of legs, so six legs total. They have compound eyes, so their eyes are made up of lots of individual facets, and they all have two antennas coming off of the front. So not all insects have wings. A lot of times we see flying insects around. There are lots of flying insects, but that's not kind of a basic of what makes an insect an insect. So then what makes a bee a bee? So bees are insects. They get all their food from flowers. They're usually fuzzy, but they come in all different colors and lots of different sizes and shapes. So when you picture a bee, you most likely are picturing, black and yellow and fuzzy, and there are lots of black, yellow, fuzzy bees, but there are also blue bees and white bees and shiny bees and all the different green, shiny, green metallic bees. One of the things that really is important for bees is what their hair looks like. So this is zooming in really closely, but part of why bees are so fuzzy and how they're able to collect so much pollen so well is that they have these branched hairs. So if you zoom in on the hairs of any bee, they will have these branched hairs. Even the ones that aren't very fuzzy, when you zoom in on their hairs, they have these hairs that look like feathers. So bees are, generally hairy. They're a lot of times you will see pollen on them. So if you look at the pictures of these bees, you can see these different colored pollens on these different bees, and they're carrying them in different spots too. So, but you can see, purple pollen, white pollen, yellow pollen, orange pollen, all this different kind of stuff. This places where they're carrying it. Bees also tend to have a thin waist and broad hind legs, and part of that is also helping them carry pollen around. So another way that you can find bees out there, tell it's a bee, is how it is behaving. So you will see bees visiting flowers, actively collecting pollen. So when you see them out there on flowers, they're usually digging into the flower, scrambling around, trying to get pollen on their body. That bee is doing a really good job, really covered with pollen. We also sometimes talk about some of those other non-bee pollinators as wannabes. So there are flies, wasps, and moths that can look like bees. And these wannabes do visit flowers for nectar, but they're usually not as focused on pollen. They do pollinate, they do move pollen around, but they just kind of are picking up pollen as they're going along. Wasps are one of these groups, so they are generally less hairy than bees. If you do zoom in on them, if you look at their hairs, they are just straight hairs. They don't have all those branches. And a lot of the wasps we commonly see have really slender waists, have kind of long, skinny legs. Wasps are very diverse, very interesting, important insects. Flies are can be pretty variable, but there's some common features. So they tend to have really big eyes and really kind of stubby antenna. They're usually less hairy. And one of these things, if you kind of look close up, they only have two pairs of wings. Bees, two wings, one pair of wings. Bees have two pairs of wings. A lot of times flies also kind of hold their wings. You can see in the couple pictures here where they're holding them out kind of at an angle. kind of like a triangle. Bees do that sometimes too, but it's really a common fly behavior for them to do that. And you can see this, especially this one in the middle here, that is really tricky. There are some really tricky flies that look a lot like bees, but if you look closely at this bee, you can see, I mean, at this fly, you can see this kind of, the kind of antenna are more stubby, the eyes are really big. And the behavior would be a giveaway for this bee too. You don't see, or for this fly, you don't see these going to flowers. They are predators going around capturing other insects. Moths are different from bees and they don't have that thin waist. Their antennae are long and straight, often fuzzy. Bees have these elbowed antennas. Um, and also they'll be, a lot of times they're kind of near, that they have these long tongues. They'll roll out to collect nectar. They're not digging into the flowers. So in general, these wannabes are having less contact with pollen. You can see here this nice, beautiful little skipper is just has this long tongue that it just is sticking into the flower, not scrambling around collecting pollen at all. So we do have a slide set that digs into this and is a fun interactive presentation that you can use with folks as well. The diversity also connects so we're starting to talk about the diversity still. So this connects in with the pollinator diversity cards and pull them out. I'm just going to show you the physical ones so you can see the size of these. So we have this laminated card set that's in the toolkit that has these cards, and they're also available as a slide set. And I'm just going to break down the anatomy of those diversity cards. So when you're using those at a tabling event, or if you're using the slide set, that you know what's going on with that. So the front all have photos of bees, and these are all from actually from photos that people have submitted to iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is a tool we like to encourage people to use to learn about their pollinators. So this is a good way to let people know about that and show the beautiful photos that you can get there. So these diversity cards will have the common name as well as the scientific name. The approximate number of species, sometimes it's in Minnesota, sometimes it's in North America, because we have updated these to our cards to be more applicable outside of Minnesota as well. There'll be some key characteristics for how to identify the different pollinators, some information about how they live, a size range, and then a fun fact. So we do also have a whole video kind of digging into more background information on all of those bees and different pollinators because it can be, yeah, it just helps to have that kind of background information in case people are asking questions or you want to engage people more with that material. So we are going to pause here for questions. So far, so good.
There was a question that someone put in the chat earlier, just asking about how pollinators are benefited themselves by moving pollen around. So
Hmm.
we talked about that a little bit with the different pollinators. You know, different pollinators are visiting flowers for different reasons. Bees are intentionally trying to gather pollen because pollen serves as their protein source. You know, it's also the protein that they're feeding to their babies as they're laying eggs. And nectar is primarily a carbohydrate source. So a lot of those other pollinators, a lot of those wannabes that we just talked about, like the flies, wasps, moths, are primarily visiting flowers to get nectar and just moving a little bit of pollen accidentally. So, you know, moving the pollen around is helping those plants to produce fruits and vegetables, but it's also providing pollinators with food. Oh, the question, does each module relate to specific hands-on activities? Yes. The modules go with the different activities that are included in the Pollinator Toolkit. And there's another question. We are having a pollinator event this summer. Can we get any of these physical activities in mid-June? So when you complete your pollinator ambassador training, so after you do that cumulative exam and do your practice presentation, we will send you a pollinator toolkit. So you will have your very own toolkit that you can use the physical activities for as you're doing your pollinator outreach. Looking good?
Yeah, I just need to, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So the next sort of topic we're going to talk about is how are the pollinators doing? Because as you go to do pollinator outreach, especially as you're tabling, one question that you will encounter, you get asked very frequently is, how are the pollinators doing? Or how are the bees doing? So we have some activities and information for you within the Pollinator Toolkit that can help answer this question. This is from this activity called in decline or fine. So we know that some pollinator populations are declining, while other pollinator populations are still appearing to be stable. But for the majority of pollinators, we actually don't have enough data to know how their populations are doing. One pollinator that we do know how they are doing are bumblebees. We know that about 1 in every 3 species of bumblebee is in decline or facing some degree of extinction risk. The rusty patch bumblebee is an example of this. This was once a very common bumblebee across the eastern half of the United States that is now facing extinction. So prior to the year 2000, the rusty patch bumblebee was found all across the East Coast. So the little dots on this map here represent specimens that were preserved in collections of the rusty patch bumblebee. So this is kind of just illustrating that this bee was found from Minnesota up to Maine and down into Georgia. So pretty much most of the East Coast, you could find the rusty patch bumblebee, and it was pretty abundant. Um, in the early 2000s is when sort of this decline of this bumblebee had been noticed. The yellow shading on the map here shows the historical range of the rusty patch bumblebee, and those little purple dots show the sightings that happened of rusty patch bumblebee in the early 2000s. So you can see it's really just a few areas kind of within the Midwest that rusty patch bumblebee was being seen in the early 2000s. This is the current map of the range of the rusty patch bumblebee. So the red areas on this map show areas where rusty patch bumblebee has been found or there is a high potential of finding this species. And then the yellow areas kind of around those red spots is where rusty patch bumblebee is likely to be found. But as you can see, it's really reduced to what the historic range once was. We're really just seeing rusty patch bumblebee in parts of the Twin Cities, through Wisconsin, into Iowa and Illinois, and there's another population of rusty patch bumblebees out in West Virginia that seems to be persisting as well. There are some actions that we are trying to take to help rusty patch bumblebees. So things like creating and protecting pollinator habitat, planting flowers, making sure this bee has access to food from early spring through fall, as well as creating nesting habitat. Protecting this bee from pesticides is really important. Pesticides can have a lot of different negative impacts on pollinators. They can affect things like flight and navigation or reproduction. Minimizing risk from pests and pathogens, and as well as documenting and monitoring this species. So using iNaturalist to upload observations of rusty patch bumblebee. Those iNaturalist observations are really important for informing this map. So a lot of the data that's used to create this map that comes out every year comes directly from iNaturalist because there are so many people out there looking for this bee. So, helping to take photos to document Rusty Patch Bumblebee is really important. If you want to learn more about the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, we have a brand new supplementary module on Canvas that covers the Rusty Patch Bumblebee. We talk about the history of its decline, some potential causes of its decline, actions that can be taken to help its recovery, as well as some information on how to ID Rusty Patch Bumblebee. So our next kind of group of pollinators that we can look at, are they fine or are they in decline, are honeybees. And honeybees are not currently in decline. They have been in the news a lot in recent years because beekeepers have experienced pretty high rates of colony loss from one season to another. But this is because honeybees are prone to a lot of health problems. They're currently experiencing this health crisis, but their colony numbers are still able to remain stable because beekeepers are able to split their colonies as needed to replace the colonies that they lost from one winter to another. There are lots of economic impacts on beekeepers when they're losing their colonies, but honeybees are not considered a declining or endangered species. Monarch butterflies are another pollinator that we have enough data or understanding about to assess how their populations are doing. Monarchs are unfortunately in decline, and their populations have been decreasing pretty steadily over at least the last 25 years. Looking at some data here from the Western monarch count. So, monarch butterflies on the West Coast overwinter near the Rocky Mountains. So, when they go to those overwintering sites, scientists and volunteers go out to count how many, monarchs they're seeing at those overwintering sites. This graph here shows the year along the x-axis and then the total number of monarchs that were reported along the y-axis. The green bars show the total number of monarchs that were reported, and the blue line is showing the number of sites that were monitored. So we can see over, since 1997, the number of sites that have been monitored has increased, but the number of monarchs that have been reported at these sites has pretty steadily decreased. So unfortunately, monarch butterflies are declining, and they are another pollinator that is needing our help to document and conserve their habitat. Module 10 in Canvas is called Monarch Mishaps. We have this game in the Pollinator Toolkit called Monarch Mishaps that illustrates the difficulties that monarchs face at all different points in their life cycle, whether that's from predators, or other, challenges that they might encounter. And this module explains how to play this Monarch Mishaps game and how to use it as you're doing pollinator outreach. So what are the factors that are causing pollinator decline? Unfortunately, there's not really one thing that we can point to that is causing pollinator declines. It's rather sort of various factors that are causing declines that are interacting with each other in ways that are making things more difficult for pollinators. So some of the challenges that pollinators are facing are, from habitat loss. There's less flowers out there to provide them with pollen and nectar. And some of the flowers that are out there, are not giving them adequate nutrition. There are also more pesticides that are applied, not only in agricultural areas, but in urban areas as well. Parasites and pathogens contribute to pollinator declines, as well as climate change, kind of interacting at the same time as all of these other factors. So pollinators are facing lots of these different problems all at the same time, which is compounding the damage that might be done. Module 6 is called How Are the Pollinators Doing? That talks about kind of the information I just shared a little bit more in depth to give you more confidence, as you're doing pollinator education, to talk to people about how the pollinators are doing. So we are going to pause for a short discussion. I am going to set up some breakout rooms in Zoom. So you will all be kind of assigned randomly to different little groups to discuss this question. So the question that we want you all to talk about is how can habitat creation help pollinators deal with other potential risks they face, like pesticides, diseases, and climate? All right, welcome back, everyone. Um, would anyone like to share what their group talked about in terms of how habitat creation can help pollinators deal with other potential risks they face? Go ahead and just unmute yourself and you can share what you talked about in your group.
Hey, we, kind of got into the role of, what are we seeing with glyphosate and the usage of pesticides and herbicides, in getting bee lawns, for example, started in some of our communities. Another part of our conversation was, what can we do in thinking about our audiences that we may be working with in our activities here in Southeast Minnesota. I suggested that, our Caledonia has a big egg presence. So how do we try and get those farmers to rethink a little bit about, they're going to still use this treatment for their crops, but could they increase maybe some of their buffer areas for that ecosystem transition? So, and maybe we can get the county to stop treating ditches, that we can create some better natural habitat. So that was some of the things we were talking about in our small group. Anybody else want to share anything from our group? Thanks.
Yeah, great. And that's a great point to make, how can we talk to people about their pesticide use and in areas where pesticides are necessary, what kind of other steps can we be taking to make sure pollinators have forage that's free of pesticides? Does anybody else want to share?
There,
And go ahead.
no, no.
Okay, this is Martha. We talked about this summer is going to be a really, really tough summer for pollinators. Apparently, there have been very high temperatures predicted for the summer. I know that my response, no matter what our weather is, no matter what our climate situation is, I'm going to be planting more native plants and encouraging others to plant native plants, trees, shrubs, uh, grasses, and flowers. I think the more habitat I can create in my own yard, as well as encourage community members to create habitat, as also city government to create habitat, and help them with it. I think that can help. It can help them to reproduce. It can help them to travel. It can help the small patches can connect to other small patches and help pollinators survive and thrive.
Yeah, that's super important. Yeah. So in spite of these challenges like climate change, making sure pollinators have enough access to nutritious forage, nutritious pollen and nectar, that's a great way to make sure that they have, safe spaces. And that's a great point to make too about planting native plants, including trees and grasses and things, because there are a lot of those native plants that we consider to be more climate resilient as our climate is changing. So those kind of plants, can sometimes withstand those really extreme ends of temperatures. And that's really important because those plants are going to be more consistently providing food for pollinators.
And there's a
Just on
comment in
that
the
thought, could I just add, thinking
Yes.
about the warming temperatures in Minnesota, it might be wise then to start thinking about the kinds of plants that used to grow on our prairies or grow in southern United States. So things like sedum do really, really well in hot, dry places, and I have my boulevard planted in various perennials that tolerate a lot of heat and little water. So I'll see how it does this spring and summer.
Yeah, that's a great point. Those plants that are really heat and drought tolerant are super important for pollinators as our climate is changing. Awesome. But we'll have more opportunities to kind of chat with other ambassadors at lunch and this later this afternoon. But let's keep plugging along here for the sake of time.
Yeah, I'm between you and lunch with with really this is kind of the core of our information we want to get out there are these actions to help pollinators. So we've boiled this down to four. Of course, there's more than this, but in my head, as an educator, it helps me to have this number in my head so I can go there. What can I do to help pollinators? And I know I can remember four things, and then I have to remember what all of them are. So this has been a nice tool for me to remember to make sure that I say all of these important things. So our in our four actions, our first action is planting flowers, which were just talking about, but just in the chat, just get a chat flow going there of what your favorite plants are for pollinators and why. And I'll share that my if I have to pick one favorite plant, I'm going to pick lead plant. Amorpha canadensis. It's a native kind of shrubby flower that has this beautiful bright orange pollen, and it tends to be more abundant in remnant prairies. Has one of the things I love about it is besides its beauty, is that it attracts a lot of different kind of diverse pollinators. So please just share your favorite plants. It's a good time of year to start thinking about what all of our favorite things are to get out there. So for plants, the basic thing is we want to be able to attract and support those diverse pollinators. So having things blooming, particularly in those shoulder seasons, in the early spring and the fall, can help fill in gaps when stuff might not be as abundant and those pollinators really need help. But trying to have stuff blooming that's kind of across the season, and also really important to keep those plants free of pesticides, which including both fungicides and insecticides. So there are a lot of different types of flowers that are available for pollinator gardens. So there are native plants, which are adapted to local soil and climates, low maintenance, reduced water needs, co-evolved with pollinators. So there's a lot of benefits for using native plants. They can be a little bit harder to find. So you do there are nurseries that specialize in native plants, and you can also get into this by get into increase the amount of native plants in your gardens by doing seed collecting and seed starting and getting into it and promoting your native plants that way. Besides native plants, there are also cultivars. So these are horticulturally bred plants. So this one here, this starburst sunflower, there are some benefits that some reasons why gardeners may prefer cultivars. So there can be enhanced disease resistance. Some gardeners can be looking for particular kinds of colors. There can be more compact growth forms, but there is variable value to pollinators. So some cultivars are fine. Some cultivars might be preferred, but some will not be used by pollinators. So another benefit is these are commonly available. Like all the regular nurseries are will have cultivars. To tell if the plant that you're getting is a cultivar, when you see the plant name listed after the genus and species, there'll be an X or a CV and another name there showing that this has been crossbred or specially bred. There is another type of plant called nativars, which you will see sometimes. So these are cultivars that are based on native plants. So it's kind of a balance between having some native native-ish plants, but having them be ornamental. But they're not native plants. They are bred. They are a cultivar. It's just a type of cultivar. So it's the same kind of deal where they can have variable value to pollinators. So like this echinacea here has way too many petals close to where all the nectar and pollen is, and it can make it much more difficult for bees to get in there and get what they need. So some of these can be commonly available, but that in general, the simplest thing to talk to people about is using native flowers. So that's the best for really restoring the ecological function in the landscapes. Um, but recognizing that they can be more difficult to source. They can, depending on what people are dealing with and their situation. We do mostly want people to have flowers there, but to be conscious of the value of those flowers more broadly. I just want to share a few resources that are helpful for finding out more about plants. There's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of different choices. At the Bee Lab here, we've put together this planting resource, which is on our website and is a compilation of a lot of different other resources for other PDFs and things that have information about planting. I believe Elise is going to be putting these links into the chat. The Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Conservation has their own resource they've put together called the Pollinator and Biodiversity Toolbox. And that has a wide range of information about, how to get funding for plantings, what to plant there. There are also some great resources from national organizations. So the Xerces Society does a lot of pollinator conservation work. They have some great planting lists and resources for planting, as does the Pollinator Partnership. It's these eco-regional planting guides. So there's lots of information out there to learn more. We've taken for the toolkit activities, we've taken some of this information about pollinator gardens and made it into a board game. So we have our pollinator garden buffet board game that is in the toolkit, and we have a video that explains how to use that. So I'm going to pause for a little bit of a discussion or of what resources you know and rely on, if there's other things besides what we've mentioned here. And this, I think we can just put stuff in the chat or unmute. Feel free to unmute and speak up if you have any resources you really like for planting. I know we've got some master gardeners.
I like Homegrown National Park, and of course Prairie Moon has a lot of native plants, and they have a lot of information about native plants.
Yep, Northern Gardener magazine. I'm just going to keep doing the props. Their latest issue is like tons of stuff on native plants, and this one, it's a really exciting issue.
I think a lot of areas of Minnesota will have similar sorts of resources, but over here in central western Minnesota, they're technically on North Dakota side, but Martha and I are really familiar with this organization called United Prairie Foundation. And they do like hand seed collection. And so it's super local types of native plants. And if you just consult with them, they'll give you a big old list and they'll say, I have this area, and they'll give you a big list. We also, like with the master gardeners, we'll do plant sales. And so our extension educator will curate, these go well in like sunny spots, not sunny water areas and things like that. So local like extension plant sales and stuff like that are always a really good resource too.
Awesome.
Good morning, all. Is it still morning? No. I'd like to recommend also your county soil and water conservation districts. They are just a pool of resources for what's good in your locale. I also am a member of a Wild Ones organization, which is a national organization that really relies on native plants. Anything by Doug Tallamy, the incredible importance of planting natives.
Speaking of Doug Tallamy, can I give a quick shout out? The pollinator event that Martha was talking about in the chat a little bit earlier is a part of our Moorhead, Clay County over in Minnesota. We're hosting Doug Tallamy at the
Ooh.
University of Minnesota in Moorhead State University of Minnesota. He will be in Moorhead on June 25th. If you want to come and see him, we'll have him. But yeah, that's another good resource.
Seven,
That's
Doug will be here. He's going to do a presentation at MSUM on June 25th at 7 on the MSUM campus. I forgot the address, but
yeah,
it's
we
in
can
the science
share it in the
building.
discussion.
I'll
Yeah,
share it.
people, yeah, get into Canvas, and lots of people want to hear about that. That's really exciting. Awesome. So in general, when people hear about pollinators, people think about flowers, but there's lots of other things to think about too. So our number two action is providing homes. So besides something to eat, these bees need places to live. And there are all these different things that we dig into with more detail. For most of the bees are nesting in the ground. There's also bees that nest in cavities and stems. Bumblebees kind of do their own thing, but in general, creating kind of wild corners, it can be helpful for them. And we also have information about having host plants there for caterpillars. So we've got the famous monarch and milkweed pair here, but there are lots of other moths and butterflies that are dependent on all kinds of different plants. So again, just having those diverse native plants can help them out. Our third action is taking climate action. And we know that pollinators are impacted by climate with shrinking ranges and being affected by those extreme climate events, changing phenologies of things. So we know it's important to help, and you can help by using clean energy sources like wind and solar, planting trees and grasslands. So we hear about planting trees, but planting grasslands and native plants that have deep root systems can help sequester carbon, supporting sustainable agriculture, and also supporting environmental regulations that can bring this out to a broad level are all important things for the future there. And our fourth action, so we've had plant flowers, provide homes, take climate action. Our fourth action is collecting data. So we have a number of different public participation in science programs where people can get out and collect data about monarchs. You can share data about bumblebees, and with iNaturalist, you can collect data on any natural living thing and share it there. And these are all resources where scientists are actively using these data sets to improve what we know and make better recommendations for how to help. Plug for a few of these public participation programs. So this is one that Elise and I work on along with other people in the Bee Lab here, called Minnesota Bumblebee Nest Quest. And this is one that we're expanding out statewide for the first time this year. So we're very excited about it, where we're having people help us learn more about where bumblebees nest. There are a lot of bumblebees that we don't know about. What they really use. So we're having volunteers going out and helping us look for bumblebees. We have an upcoming training for that on May 7th. And so this is something we'd love you all to help people know about. We're again trying to get kind of spread out all across the state.
Can
And
I, sorry, interrupt really quick? Just
yeah.
going back to bumblebee nesting, Sydney asked a really great question in the chat about bumblebee homes, and if those sort of artificial nest boxes that people sometimes put out for bumblebees are beneficial or not. Part of the reason why we're doing this Nest Quest project is because there's very little information known about where bumblebees actually choose to nest. But I think for the most part, those artificial nest boxes, we don't actually think they're the best places for bumblebees to nest. Just because you put one out doesn't mean a bumblebee's going to nest there. So kind of with this idea of creating homes or nesting habitat, creating sort of natural areas or messy corners is what's going to be, as based on what we know so far, is what's most likely going to be best for creating bumblebee nesting habitat. Bumblebees like to nest where rodents like to nest.
Could I just add one thing that I sort of recently learned a few years ago, and that is that people sometimes cut back even perennials in the wintertime, and you should really leave many different perennials up so that they can be used as homes in the wintertime. And I still have to learn more about which ones can be cut or how far they can be cut back or which ones should be left entirely alone. But I do know that myself and other ecologists in the area and a non-ecologist, they all have the same information. And so we're all starting to leave our plants alone pretty much in the winter so that pollinators and other insects have habitat.
Yeah, we have a nice handout that kind of goes over the phenology of stem nesting bees and how they what their timing is with things. So I'll put something in the chat to
Thank you.
share that with you in a second here. So all of this four actions information is all in module 7 with more information. We're actually doing kind of okay on time if there's any questions that people have about the four actions before we move on.
I just put that resource on
Oh, thank you.
creating stem nesting habitat in the chat.
So yeah, this four actions piece again, kind of at the core of things. It is something that we hope whenever you're giving a presentation that you're able to kind of pop these in, because we really want to have people come away from the Pollinator Ambassadors presentations with having ideas about things that they can do to make things better for pollinators.
And that four actions module, we kind of introduced what those four actions are. The module in Canvas gets a little bit more in depth on, how to create stem nesting habitat or some more examples of collecting data. All right, so I'm going to move ahead here if I don't see any other questions. The last little bit that we have for you this morning before we have our short lunch break is pollinator trivia. So we can use this as an opportunity to kind of test some of your knowledge from this morning, as well as kind of introduce you to this pollinator trivia. This is another activity that's included in the Pollinator Toolkit. So the trivia in the physical toolkit comes as a deck of cards, and then digitally there's a PDF that you can print or a slide set that goes through these trivia questions. So there's a lot of different ways to use pollinator trivia as you are doing pollinator outreach. So the first question we have for you is, many insects act as pollinators. Which of these insects are not pollinators? Is it A, wasps, B, flies, C, beetles, or D, dragonflies? Go ahead and put your answers in the chat. So I'm seeing lots of correct answers come in. Dragonflies is the correct answer. So dragonflies are not pollinators. They do not visit flowers for nectar or pollen. They eat other insects. Beetles, wasps, and flies all visit flowers to forage for nectar and pollen. Some plants depend on beetles, flies, or wasps for pollination. Next question. What is the sweet reward that plants produce to attract pollinators to come to flowers? Yeah, the correct answer is nectar. So most flowers need pollinators in order to reproduce. By producing nectar in parts of the plant that force pollinators to come in contact with pollen, flowers are able to use pollinators to transfer their pollen to flowers that need it to produce seeds and fruits. So nectar is the primary sort of carbohydrate source for pollinators. It's that sweet reward that a lot of insects will get when they're visiting flowers. Our next trivia question is, where do most bee species make their nests? Is it A, in trees, B, in the ground, C, in plant stems, or D, in the grass? The correct answer is B, in the ground. So over 80% of bee species make their nests in the ground. And don't confuse these solitary ground nesting bees with territorial yellow jacket wasps. Most of these ground nesting bees are solitary, so it's just one bee kind of establishing her own nest. You can help these bees find homes by having different soil types and different soil conditions in your gardens. This goes right along with that second action of creating habitat by having bare soil, leaf cover, disturbed and undisturbed soil, are all ways to create habitat for ground nesting bees. Our next trivia question is, which of the following is not a way that pesticides, which includes insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides, harm pollinators? Is it A, cause blindness, B, interfere with navigation, C, make more susceptible to disease, or D, reduce food availability? This one's a little tricky, so the correct answer is A, cause blindness. So pesticides do not, or as far as we know, impair impact or insect vision. Pesticides can reduce pollinator health by interfering with navigation or increasing susceptibility to disease. Although herbicides are meant to kill weeds, they can also kill flowering plants that pollinators need for food. On what body part do leafcutter bees carry most of their pollen? Is it A, their bellies, B, their legs, C, their armpits, or D, their foreheads? Seeing a little bit of pretty mixed answers with this one. I know this isn't something we talked about earlier, so this is a little bit trickier of a question. So I'm seeing most people are saying B, which is a really good guess, but the correct answer is actually A. So leafcutter bees have hair on the underside of their abdomens to carry pollen. So right here you can see all of this yellow dust that's pollen on the underside of that abdomen. Most other bees do carry most of their pollen on their legs. So those of you that answered B, for most other bees that we talk about, that the legs would be the correct answer. Leafcutter bees have those pollen collecting hairs called scopa on the underside of their abdomens. Then I think we have one more trivia question for you all. True or false? Teaching others about pollinators is a great start to support bee conservation. Yeah, great job. This is true. So talking to your family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers, or becoming a pollinator ambassador about how they can help pollinators is a great way to be involved in helping pollinators. So module 8 in Canvas is pollinator trivia, where we kind of just introduce you to how you can use the pollinator trivia in your outreach. This is available in the digital toolkit, so you can take a look at that as well. So I think we'll pause for questions here really quick, and then we will have our lunch break. So you are welcome. We're going to keep the Zoom open during lunch, so you can grab your lunch, come back. It's a great time to sort of chat. We can have sort of an open dialogue, a chance to meet other ambassadors in this group. But before we do that, I just wanted to pause, see if anybody has any questions. Does that look good? Cool. All right. So our focus for this
Oops, just
afternoon.
slideshow. You just still need slideshow still. There you go.
Okay. So our focus for this afternoon that we'll talk about kind of for the rest of our time is sort of the basics of volunteering 101. So things we'll cover this afternoon include how to find events. We were getting a lot of questions this morning about how pollinator ambassadors are finding events. How to set up a table at an event. So a lot of pollinator ambassadors are tabling, or having a sort of exhibit or booth at events. So what does that look like? We'll talk about how to be a good public speaker. Public speaking is difficult, but we have some guidance to make it maybe a little bit easier for you. We'll also talk about answering questions from the public. There's a lot of different, topics and things that people ask pretty frequently. So we'll kind of help get you started with how to answer some of those questions. We'll also talk a bit about promoting inclusion in your volunteer work. That's something that's really important to us in this program is, making sure we're including diverse audiences and people from lots of different backgrounds as we're engaging in talking about pollinators. And then we'll kind of talk just super briefly about the supplementary modules that we have available on Canvas that are available to you after you finish the required components of your training. So as a review from this morning, the volunteer expectations as a pollinator ambassador is that you are committed to engaging in 5 events or presentations each year. And when we say each year, that's from the date that you officially complete your training through that date the following year. So if you finish all of your pollinator ambassador training on March 21st, 2026, then your 1 year period, of doing 5 events is from March 21st, 2026 to March 21st, 2027. And these events, can look like different things. It could be tabling, it could be giving talks or presentations, running activities. We'll talk a little bit about kind of what some of the pollinator ambassadors did over the last few years as well. And these could be events that you are exhibiting at. So if a local group or organization is hosting an Earth Day event, you could have a table at that event, or you could host or set up your own event or work with, your local library or another organization or potentially other ambassadors as well to meet this 5 event requirement. There are a few different ways to go about finding events. So the Bee Squad gets a lot of requests for pollinator education, both talks and tabling events. Very often, many of these events take place both inside and outside the Twin Cities. And obviously, our pretty small team of outreach experts can't make it to all of these events. So I will reach out to you directly if there is an event in your area. This is part of why we also have this Pollinator Ambassadors as kind of this application-based program. So we know where our different ambassadors are based, so we can connect with you based on event requests sort of by region. We also have that event board page on Canvas where we post opportunities. You can find this in the sort of discussions section in the left-hand column on Canvas that we showed this morning. Canvas announcements are another place that sometimes I will post events. So that's just one way is you can, be connected to events based on the requests that we're getting at the Bee Lab. But what if there are no events happening in your area and you want to host your own event in order to meet this 5 event requirement? Yes, we would love that if you can host your own event. And there's a few different ways to kind of go about hosting or finding places to have events. Reaching out to your local library, I keep emphasizing this point because it's something that a lot of our currently active volunteers have had a lot of success with. There's been a lot of opportunities to collaborate with their libraries to set up tabling events or story times or events. Connecting with local garden clubs as well. I've given a lot of talks to gardening clubs. I know Elaine's given a lot of talks to gardening clubs. These are groups of people that are already super interested in taking actions to support pollinators as well as learning more about pollinators themselves. Working with your local city or county parks or park districts could be another great way to find or set up events as well. So looking at the types of events that Pollinator Ambassadors engaged in 2025. So we have the event type along that x-axis and then the number of events along that y-axis. So most of the events that our ambassadors were doing in 2025 were tabling events. So these are events where they're setting up a table with lots of activities and handouts and available to ask questions. A lot of ambassadors also did talks. So these are presentations, where they're covering some of the activities from the Pollinator Toolkit or combining multiple activities from the Pollinator Toolkit or sort of doing a mix of their own slide presentation content and content from the Pollinator Toolkit. We had some ambassadors do pollinator story times. So these are often happening with their libraries where they're picking a book that covers that talks about pollinators, reading that at their library, talking a little bit about actions to help pollinators. And then a lot of ambassadors did pollinator trivia, so hosting a trivia night, with various different groups or organizations or communities within the spaces that they frequent has been another great way for people to engage about pollinators. In terms of types of audiences, we had kind of pretty broad variety here. Again, a lot of people were able to engage with audiences that frequented their local libraries. We also had a lot of ambassadors attending local community events to set up a table about pollinators, or attending a county fair or festival. The Minnesota State Fair is another place where we will definitely be reaching out to you all to get some help with tabling, to talk to folks about pollinators. Gardening groups or religious communities that many of our ambassadors are already part of. They've been able to do presentations to those groups. And then we also had, things like art exhibit. I know Anne, who is one of our pollinator ambassadors that's in the Zoom, is an artist that had a pollinator exhibit set up last summer and was able to connect with some folks that way. Nature centers, gardening centers, and then other local clubs like lake associations or Rotary clubs have been different types of audiences that pollinator ambassadors have engaged with over time. And we're really hoping to, by sharing this information with you, kind of show how there are lots of different types of audiences and organizations that are really interested in pollinators, that our ambassadors have been able to work with in the past. So we have some rules and guidelines for you all when it comes to hosting or planning your own event. So the first, is pick an appropriate place for your event. Are you thinking about doing something indoors or outdoors? Think about who your audience might be. This could maybe be a local city or county park, maybe your community center or library, or even working with, again, your local garden club, and making sure you have appropriate permissions and coordinating with the appropriate stakeholders. So if you want to host and plan your own tabling event to set up in your local city or county park, making sure that you have any permits or necessary permissions to be doing that. Another really important piece of this is to be in compliance with the university's safety of minors policy. We ask that you don't plan an event with minors, so anyone under the age of 18 as the target audience. So this means that you are welcome to host and plan your own event, but they need to be directed and advertised as being events for the general public, rather than saying, we're going to have a pollinator trivia night for kids in this community. We're trying to make sure, that your events are advertised and focused at the general public rather than minors. It's also really great when you can to advertise your event. So whether this is through physical flyers that you're putting up around the community, posting on social media, getting your ad into the local paper or on into community radio stations. And we can help with this. We have some social media templates for you if you want to create your own flyers. We can also put things onto the B Lab calendar. So if you are hosting an event or there's an event in your community that you think is important and you want us to help spread the word, we can help share that information. Then let's pause really quick so we can answer some questions because I know that's kind of a lot of information that we are throwing at you all at once.
Yeah, I have a question about the group of minors, because if I'm a Ramsey County garden educator and I already work in a children's programming garden, and we don't use the term master gardener anymore, but as garden educators, we have to go through a minor check every 3 years, and we have to do a program. We kind of go through that process of being saying that we're okay to work with minors. I'm just wondering if we're not planning an event, but an event is already existing that is geared for children, and we're invited to do a pollinator project there. Can we do that? We're not starting from scratch, but it's already a pre-approved space for children.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if another organization is planning an event and they invite you to attend that event or have a table or whatever at that event, that's okay because it's that organization's responsibility to make sure that everybody that is providing education at that event has the proper background checks or credentials or whatnot that they need to be working with children. So that's okay. If another organization is already hosting an event for kids, it's just we don't want you to be the one that's hosting an event for kids. Any other questions about finding events?
I have one, and that would be if people ask if they can get access to Canvas, is it okay to give them the link to Canvas? Can other people have it or just the ambassadors and you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before we give people access to Canvas, we just ask that they complete that Pollinator Ambassadors application
Okay.
because we want to be keeping track of people as they're sort of coming into the program. So if people ask about how they can become a Pollinator Ambassador, directing them towards our website or the application form is great, but we don't want to be sharing that link to Canvas with folks that haven't had a chance to apply for the program first.
And I can imagine people would go away with so much information that it's okay to prepare handouts, paper handouts for people to take with them.
Yeah, so we have quite a few handouts that we've developed at the Bee Lab that have, some of them have lists of plants for pollinators. Some of them are like pollinator ID guides that we share with you that we'll mail to you and we send you your pollinator toolkit. You are totally welcome to develop your own handouts to give out at events. We just want to have a chance to take a look at them first. So if you develop a handout or resource that you want to share with people, just run it by us about 2 weeks before your event, and that should be totally fine.
Okay, thank you.
I had a few further. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that one thing that people can ask if people don't want to take the whole pollinator ambassador training, but they're interested in some of the materials, the digital pollinator education toolkit. There is just a Google form people fill out, and then anyone in the public can access that digital toolkit.
And so could you guys then provide us with the various names that people would have to contact to get access to the forms, for example, that would make it easy for
Yeah,
them?
I can, there's a link.
Okay,
I'll
all
stick it
right.
in the chat.
Okay.
Do you know what storybook that they read for small kids to the library, what the name of it is for pollinators by any chance?
Not off the top of my head, but I can find out. There's a book, there is an artist that we worked with in the Twin Cities who wrote a pollinator book called The Pollinator's Gift. That's beautiful, and it's in both English and Spanish. That's a book that I would recommend if you're interested in doing a sort of pollinator story time. But I can get more information from that ambassador that did some of those story times and share that on Canvas.
So I
And
still have, am I, all right, can you hear me?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, okay. So, yeah, so I'm a Minnesota gardener and other things, and we've been doing this class with Chanhassen Elementary Learning Garden for about 5 years. And so I'm still unclear as to, this saying that you can't work with children. So the teachers come out with their students, and we do this for 2 months, April and May, and all the classes come out. So to say, yeah, so I've been cleared for like the previous speaker said, so just not sure of, yeah, where are you drawing the line again?
Yep, so doing something like that, if the school is inviting you to go speak to them, or it's the school that kind of has the event already set up,
Oh,
that's okay. It's when you are planning your own event that you're going to
oh,
maybe be hosting, at a park or, at in
oh,
your
okay.
own pollinator garden or something. Those are the kind of events where we ask that you don't advertise as being events specifically for children.
Okay. All right. Because I was going to say, whoa. All
Yeah.
right. Very good.
I know
Okay.
the guidances can get a little bit confusing about the safety of minor stuff, so thanks for
Right.
clarifying.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, a lot of the design, the intentional design that we have is for kids. We're not saying don't talk to kids. We want you to talk to kids.
Yep.
And if you wanted to give a presentation specifically, let's say to the Hmong folks that live in St. Paul, would you have to get first go to the University of Minnesota and get an okay to be able to contact officials, Hmong officials, or could the ambassador do that themselves?
The ambassadors are welcome to connect with any groups within their community that they would like to do pollinator presentations with. You don't have to go through us.
And what if they were very interested but would require a translator for many of the people who would like to attend? Would the university pay for that translator, or how does that work?
We would not be able to pay for a
That's right.
translator
That's
for
right. I
that
forgot
type
about
of,
your
yeah.
financial. Okay. All right. Thank you.
The Pollinator Toolkit is available in Spanish. So all of our pollinator, like the slide sets and everything, we have in Spanish versions, but so far we only have Spanish
Yeah.
translations for
Yeah.
the pollinator
Yeah.
toolkit materials.
Okay.
Awesome. I'm gonna jump back in here I'm gonna finish up tabling, Elaine, and then we'll get
Oh,
to
oops. Sorry. I thought it was the next break.
talk. All right, so now that we've talked a little bit about how to find events or how to host or set up your own events, we'll talk a little bit about kind of what you can do at these events. So the first thing that we'll talk about is tabling. So tabling is really great because you can talk to a lot of people in a very short amount of time. Sometimes you're not available or you're not able to engage with them at the same level as you would be able to if you were giving a presentation, but you're able to get the word out about why pollinators are important, talk about the 4 actions pretty quickly to a lot of different people. So some basic expectations when you are tabling is that you show up, in your most professional way, that you are respectful, treating other people that are tabling at the event, as well as the event organizers, as well as event attendees with respect. And that most importantly, you're there to have fun. Tabling is a really great way to talk about things that we're all really passionate about. So it's a way to have a lot of fun as you're doing pollinator outreach. Some more expectations, it's important to kind of follow the event's rules or guidelines. So if you're attending an event to have a table that's organized by like Minneapolis Parks and Recreation, for example, it's important to follow the guidelines that event has. So make sure you arrive early. Expect event setup at events to kind of to begin 1 to 2 hours before the event actually begins. Just make sure that you're following arrival times that are set by the organizers when you show up to set up your exhibit. Before the event, make sure you think about how much time it will take to travel to the event, how long it will take to unload and park your vehicle, and how much time it will take to set up your table display. Sometimes the travel time and the unloading and setup time can take a bit more time than you expect. So be sure to arrive early enough with enough extra time to get ready. Follow all rules that are set by the event organizers. If you're the event organizer, you can make up your own rules for the event, that are within kind of our Pollinator Ambassadors guidelines. But if you're exhibiting at someone else's event, make sure you're, tuned in to what they're expecting from you. Sometimes they will ask that you have certain types of signage to say what organization you're from. It's important to stay at your table at all times. If you need to use the bathroom or something, make sure you check in with an event organizer so they can watch over your table while you step away. It's important to also stay at the event for the whole event. Don't leave early, if you have emergencies, or of course, there are exceptions within that. Again, be present at your booth the whole time, and then clean up once the event is over. So make sure you pack up all of your supplies, throw away any trash, and help those around you. Tabling is really great, but it can also be pretty tiring. So helping out event organizers or other folks that are tabling alongside you, helping them clean up at the end of the night or end of the event is really helpful and can help kind of smooth things out with getting out of the event space. When you are tabling, it's also great to limit your cell phone use. When you're sitting at your table, you want to appear as approachable, ready to answer questions from people as they're passing by. And if you're sitting there using your phone, you're not going to appear as approachable to people that are attending the event. It's great to actively participate. So we have so many different activities that are part of the toolkit that you can use to actively participate with event attendees. We talked a little bit this morning about the pollinator plate, the diversity cards, and the pollinator trivia. Neil was talking a little bit about the How Bees See Flowers activity. So this is another part of the Pollinator Toolkit that we didn't mention today, but it's a slideshow or set of cards that show how we see flowers compared to how bees see flowers. Neil has some rocks that change color with UV light that he brings to some of his pollinator events to kind of show people what this looks like on another level. Another great way to kind of actively participate is think of a few sort of little sound bites or ways that you can draw people's attention in as they're passing by your table. Maybe ask if they want to try to test their pollinator knowledge and play pollinator trivia or play a guessing game to see how pollinators impact our foods. Maybe there's a few fun facts that stick out in your mind as you go through your pollinator ambassador training. Having ways to really quickly draw people's attention in is a great way to be a really active participant at your table when you're tabling. What to wear. It's important to, make sure that people know who you are. And with your Pollinator Toolkit, we will send you both a button and a Pollinator Ambassadors hat. So you're able to wear either one or both when you're doing your events. Elaine is showing off some of our awesome Pollinator Ambassadors merch that you will be able to wear to events.
Is there a reason you didn't include the University of Minnesota on that?
I think part of the reason why is because it's difficult to find vendors that will print like t-shirts and hats and things that have the University of Minnesota logo.
And the University of Minnesota is very picky about where the logo goes. We weren't able to have and the like the M as part of our logo.
Okay.
The next kind of expectation for tabling events is that you are keeping track of attendance. So there's a few different ways you can do this. You can have a little physical clicker that keeps track of the number of people that are coming up to your table. You can use an app on your phone. You can use just a piece of paper and a pencil and keep tally marks. When possible, it's great to keep track of the number of adults and the number of kids kind of separately. If that's not possible, some events like the state fair are so busy that it's too hard to kind of separate adults and kids. It's okay to just kind of have one number of attendance, but this is really important for us to track because we have to report our outreach efforts to the federal government, but it also helps us evaluate kind of the impacts of this program. Knowing how many people you all are able to reach in your pollinator outreach work is really, really important for us. One other thing too with this is there is a form for reporting event attendance that's available both on Canvas and the Pollinator Ambassadors websites. Elaine, if you could put that in the chat, that would be awesome. But that's just another way that helps us keep track of kind of all of your efforts as you're going out in the world. So how do you actually set up for a tabling event? There's a lot of different things you can kind of put up on your table when you're doing an event. Different types of events might be better suited for different activities. So we'll just share a few examples of kind of how we do it here at the Bee Lab. So kind of brief or sort of broad overview of things that we have. We have some insect specimen sets. We are not able to, unfortunately, provide specimen sets for all of our pollinator ambassadors, but are hoping to come up with some guidance for you all to create specimen sets on your own. Various handouts, talking about pollinator ID, different ways to plant for pollinators, having some sort of signage. So we have this big Bee Lab banner that we will sometimes use at events. We are hoping to create some sort of tabletop signage for our pollinator ambassadors to use, and then picking a few different activities from the toolkit to place out on your table as well. Here's a top view. So we've got kind of those specimen sets on either side, handouts distributed around the table, and then those activities. So the handouts that we have that we will provide for you with your Pollinator Toolkit. First, we have our plants for Minnesota bees. So there's just a little bit of information on the front, and then on the back is a list of plants that can be great to plant for pollinators. And in addition to the plant name, there's information about how much sun or shade that plant needs, what time of year it's blooming, if it's native. We also have a resource or handout on how to create habitat for stem nesting bees. So as we talked about this morning, 80% of bees nest in the ground, and around that other 20% nest in hollow cavities, which is very often plant stems. And this handout talks through how to cut back your perennial plants. So these cavity nesting bees can use those hollow stems to create their nests. We also have this handout called Plant a Pollinator Tea Garden that has a list of plants that are great for pollinators, but are also edible. So they're plants that you can steep into teas at home. And then our More Than Bumblebees guide. So this is meant to illustrate kind of the diversity of bees in across North America. And talk a little bit about where they nest and some of those sort of different features that different bees have. In terms of activities, there's a lot of different options with the Pollinator Toolkit. The Pollinator Diversity Matching Game is one of my favorites because it's really great to use with people of different ages and knowledge bases. There are two sets of cards that are exactly the same that have a picture of a pollinator on one side and the name on the other. And we have those same cards that are both outlined in green and outlined in yellow. So you can set it up where you have, kind of scattered around, you have the names up and the pictures up, and people have to match the name to the photo. For younger audiences, sometimes it's nice to just have the picture set up so people are just matching the pictures together and then talking a little bit more about what that pollinator is. But I really like the matching game. I think it's a really great way to draw people in at a tabling event. The pollinator plate as well. This, I think, activity is really impactful for people to kind of think about how pollinators might play a role in their day-to-day life because they're eating food every day. How bees see flowers. Again, I talked just briefly about that activity. That's another great one that people can kind of look through really quickly, where it's just a picture on one side of how we see the flower and then a picture on the other side of how the bee sees the flower. Pollinator trivia, again, is another great activity to have at your table. We have a wheel that people can spin, and then we use the deck of cards to ask them questions from there. You don't need a trivia wheel. It's not necessary to play pollinator trivia, but it's been something that's worked pretty well for us. We have a lot of sort of bumblebee specific content that I like to set up all together. So we have a specimen set that's just bumblebees. We have this little teeny tiny remnants of a bumblebee nest. And then our Midwest Bumblebee ID guide, and then these postcards that talk about Bumblebee Watch. It's great to kind of group or organize content together on your table as much as possible. That sort of helps people sort of find a flow as they're looking through the activities on your table. And that is the basics for setting up a table at an event.
Elias, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Whether it's tabling or talk, I'm wondering if you guys have ever considering partnering with a nursery and that would have pollinator plants for pollinators, so that once you gave the presentation, either the talk or you have all this good information you just presented, and you could say, and the plants are right across the aisle over here where they have some plants for you at a reduced price. And the reason I'm asking that is because I started converting my entire yard in St. Paul to native perennials a couple decades ago after going to a neighborhood energy consortium meeting where they were selling native perennials for a really reduced price. And that started me tearing up my entire front yard and planting them. And now my whole yard almost is entirely planted. And I think it would be wonderful if you could, get a nursery to be right there and they could take 100% of whatever the plants are sold at, but it would be easy for people to get. And it would, I think, get them going like it got me going just by being able to get the plants right there and take them home and plant them.
Yeah, there's one ambassador I know who's done quite a bit of tabling at some plant nurseries. We haven't had an opportunity to kind of collaborate with them to that extent where we're able to sort of they're able to sell people plants at a reduced price, but doing events at plant nurseries is a great idea. Sometimes at some events, if like we plan this event called the Pollinator Party in collaboration with Minneapolis Parks and Rec, and there's usually some different plant vendors like Prairie Restorations that will be at that event. So thinking about kind of other people that might be exhibiting at the same event as you is another kind of great way to sort of guide or direct people towards places they can buy plants.
Would you be interested in trying to see if we could develop a system of partners with the Bee Lab that would be willing to offer these things at various nurseries annually?
I think in the future that might be a place that we could move to for pollinator ambassadors, but I think right now we're kind of mostly focused on making sure we have enough ambassadors kind of representative of all parts of the state that are able to do pollinator education, but that's definitely something to consider.
Okay.
All right, I think we're going to turn things over to Elaine to talk about how to be a good public speaker and giving talks and presentations.
All right. So, yeah, in addition to tabling, you saw there's a good number of requests for talks and presentations. And I know a good number of you have experience with this, but I find it never hurts to have reminders, and that all of us can have ways we can improve to reach out to audiences. So these talks or presentations you do definitely count towards your 5 event requirement. Reminder that we do have digital presentations, so they're available either as PowerPoint, Google Slides, or as PDFs of the presentations. You can also develop your own presentations. Reminder that if you do use content that's different than what we have provided in the slide decks, we do just ask to be able to review that, getting in touch with us a couple weeks ahead of time so we have a chance to review. And we can, just have a chance to take a look at that. So I'm going to go over if you are making your own content or adapting things, just some general guidelines for design, and some of these are kind of preferences, but having font not be smaller than 24 point, because you don't want people squinting, trying to struggle to see what's there. Limit the number of different fonts that you're using. It can be distracting. Have too many different fonts. For presentations like this, the sans serif fonts, the ones without all the extra knobs, lines at the tops and bottoms, are what's recommended for what's kind of more easily accessible. Bring points in one by one, like I'm doing here. So using animation to just so people aren't having to read ahead, they can concentrate on what's happening. Reducing words is really important. So bringing that content down for what's on the slide. You can use speaker notes if you're used to ad-libbing, you can do that. But really making it so that you have the fewest words possible on your slides. This is kind of a design thing of not having like single words hanging off on their own lines. They're a little bit distracting, can make it a little bit harder to read through. So in addition to those design ideas, we also have information just about how to be a good public speaker. So for guidelines for that, we have 3 C's. So connection, content, and construction. So, connection, we like to have people, we talk about doing something at the beginning of your presentation where you're really explaining what your personal connection is. We find that that helps other people connect with you. So, so thinking about also, kind of catering things to your different audiences. If you're speaking to a group of gardeners versus a Rotary Club or a senior center, those are very different audiences, and there's different kinds of content that you can bring in. So the content that we have created in the slide decks that we share are science-based, they are action-based. So really having that focused content is really important. And then really, structuring things so that your content flows. So we do these presentation evaluations is the kind of a final requirement for the Pollinator Ambassador training after you've gone through the course in Canvas and completed all of the quizzes that are there. There is a 5-minute talk where we talked about this a little bit over lunch. We've changed things a little bit. So we're currently getting all of the training content updated to reflect that. We will have you choose one of those slide decks from the digital Pollinator Toolkit for this presentation. So there's some of the things you've seen bits of today. So the pollinator plate, the pollinator diversity, there's the 4 actions, there's other things in there like how bees see flowers. So there are, digital slide decks that are available for all of those different pieces. And so these are meant to, this presentation evaluation is to showcase your public speaking skills. So we do want you to add in a slide or two at the beginning to introduce yourself, share your personal connections. Any questions about presentations or that the 5-minute presentation, or other suggestions that people have from your experiences doing talks or presentations?
Can I ask a question about the end of talks? Can I ask a question about that? is it possible to create a very simple survey that would be that you would ask people to say after we're done here, I'd like you to fill out a survey to help us improve the program, and ask them to fill it out and just leave it on the table or whatever, where the presentation is being given, and then collect those. And some of the questions, I'm trying to think of what kind of measurables you guys need besides counts of people walking by the table or whatever, because obviously you would like to have them get some idea as to how many are actually going to do something. Yeah, I'm going to go and buy some plants, or I like this idea, trying to get at how much you impacted them. Would that be possible to do along with the talk and then have you guys approve the survey? So I got that information that would be useful to you in the program.
Yeah, we do have similar surveys that we've used, for our own presentations. I love the idea of having that. It's yeah, like you're saying, it's when people are there for a minute when you're tabling or a couple minutes, it's difficult, but it does fit in with more of these talks or presentations. Um, what we've found has worked well with that are doing these kind of online surveys. So, we can share even just a link and a QR code that could be on your final slide, and you can ask people to, please take a few minutes to fill this out and let us know, what actions you're planning to take to help pollinators, after seeing this presentation. Yeah, I like that idea.
Okay. You know me, I don't do much at all with tools, but I also would probably walk away and think I was going to do it and then forget about doing it. Whereas if you give them a piece of paper and say, "Would you please fill this out now before you leave?" then they know that you will see if you leave and they don't fill it out, so they feel more obligated to fill it out if they're doing it and you're there. So, but I think that kind of feedback would be really useful. I used to have to get a lot of grant money from foundations, and I always found that information incredibly valuable when you can prove the
Yeah,
kind of impact that
yeah,
they want.
absolutely.
For my artist reception, I created little origami butterflies. And if they wanted to commit to action, I would give them one of them for free. So then they
Wow.
have that with them and they take it home. And they're like, hey, wait, what was this? Why did I take this home? And that was like a little reminder that they wanted to do something
Can you
after.
create 500 of those and hand them out?
I I had folded 95.
Oh my gosh,
Wow.
that's great.
So yeah, I mean, it was because it was grant funded through an arts grant, where I was able to purchase the supplies for it. But it was still something that I believed in, that like I wanted to spend the time doing it to give them that small gift as a reminder.
That's very nice.
Along sort of the same lines, and also, so I'm on Pinterest all the time, and so I'll be looking at little crafty ideas and whatnot. And one of the things that can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, okay. One of the things that I saw when I was looking at, especially like entomology wise, were paper mache beetles that people would make. And so then that got me thinking of, and of course, like this would be my passion project. I wouldn't really expect anyone else to be like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna make this paper mache bee. I thought it would be very fun to try an experiment in making like a model size, not necessarily model sized, it would be blown up so that people could actually see the different parts of the bee. And I think someone had asked, like in the comments about, or in the chat, um, like how to sort of take away that fear of like bees, for children especially. And I think that would be maybe a good learning tool, and to see if that would help, especially like if they're handling this thing that doesn't look so scary when it's sort of blown up, to size or whatever. But I don't know, I just thought I'd comment. And then also I did have a question on um these presentations. So I'm also a master naturalist, and I was wondering if these presentations would also count to my master naturalist hours?
Yeah,
Definitely.
that's a great question. We talked about that a little bit over lunch, so thanks for bringing
Okay.
that up while everybody's here. So if you are part of Master Naturalists or Master Gardeners, your Pollinator Ambassador activities can count towards your volunteer hours for both. The
Okay.
only thing that we ask is that when you're filling out that reporting form after you've done some sort of event, just make sure you let us know that you've reported it in other places because we have to report our efforts to the federal government. So we just want to make sure that, things aren't getting double counted. But yeah,
Right.
you're totally welcome to, do an event as a master naturalist and a pollinator ambassador or use your pollinator ambassador materials at your master naturalist things because those are great ways to reach large audiences too. That's a great question.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one comment. If you're relying on a host organization to do the PowerPoint presentations, either make sure that you go ahead of time and you test that so that the person that you actually get your slides viewable, because just because they have the equipment doesn't mean they know how to use it.
Yep.
Or
Amen. I
if you
second that.
if you can't test it ahead of time, have a backup plan so that if technology fails you, you could still give a presentation that is meaningful to the audience.
Yeah, one time I just showed up at a nature center who had invited me out there to give a talk. Not only was there not any equipment to a projector or anything, there wasn't a building. Their building was under construction. So all of a sudden I was just at a picnic table with all the people there and had to spontaneously turn it into like, okay, we're just gonna talk about bees and look around at stuff, which
And
ended up
hold your
worked
head
out.
up as
But
high as you can.
And no, one thing I'll also add that's not on anybody's mind, I'm sure, but depending on your audience, and if you're giving a talk, for example, it's always, I found it very worthwhile to always have somebody in the audience who would back me up. In other words, people were giving presentations on issues and it aggravated one person who was in my audience. And I had to actually signal to the other person to please remove that person from the audience and take him out in the hall because he was going to get a little, bad acting. And if I would have had to do that myself, it would have disrupted the entire thing. So you have to sort of really anticipate sometimes that you might need help and have somebody besides just yourself there and make yourself really vulnerable and disrupt the whole proceeding. I know it sounds strange, but I've had it happen. And I will never ever go again to a meeting where I don't advise somebody to be a second, so to speak.
Yeah, it's never a bad idea to have, someone at an event that's on your team. Awesome. I think we're going to keep moving here. I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the questions that you are likely to encounter while you are tabling or after you've given a presentation. Some of these questions are pretty straightforward and some of them are a little bit more complicated. So we want to set you up for success, in answering the variety of different questions you'll get from people at events. And we have this handbook that's available to our pollinator ambassadors that has a full list of questions that you might be asked while you're tabling or after a presentation and a lot more detail of the kind of answers that you can provide. So the first kind of category I wanted to talk through is questions about planting, because this is something that you definitely will experience quite a lot as a pollinator ambassador. Hearing questions like, what plants are good for bees? What kind of flowers do bees like? Should I plant only native plants? How can I support bees? These types of questions are things that you can expect to hear from people as you are doing events. And there's a few sort of pieces of or sort of guidelines we like to give our ambassadors when it comes to answering these questions. We have a lot of resources and handouts that are set up to help you talk to people about what to plant. We have that Plants for Minnesota Bees guide. We talked this morning about other various resources that the Xerces Society and Pollinator Partnership offer that can help people select plants. But reminding them that different plants grow in different conditions. So if your yard is sunny or if your yard is shady, there might be different plants that are suitable for that space. Also emphasizing the point that it's important to have a diversity of plants that can suit a diversity of bees that are blooming all season long from early spring through late fall. When it comes to planting only native plants, well, native plants are going to provide the best resources for bees. There are reasons that people might want to plant either not native plants or those sort of cultivars that we talked about earlier if they're looking for a specific sort of aesthetic appeal within their garden. So having some balance, of planting lots of native plants that can support pollinators while also having some plants that fit a really specific look that you're going for with your garden is usually appropriate. In terms of questions about how can I support bees, we like to talk about, the 4 actions that we talked about this morning. So planting flowers, creating homes, taking climate action, and collecting data. You can also expect to get a lot of questions about honeybees. So, we talked just briefly about how honeybees, are not an endangered species. They're not native to the US, but they are really charismatic and well-liked and well-known pollinators. So it's fair to assume that you'll probably get a lot of questions about honeybees. Questions like, I can't become a beekeeper, but I still want to save the bees. Or there are many people that are beekeepers that are looking for resources as well as questions about honey. It's important, when people are talking to you about wanting to save the bees, a great way to answer that is to talk about the 4 actions, that we just mentioned. Becoming a beekeeper is not going to save the bees, because being a beekeeper, is only supporting honeybees, and honeybees have a lot of problems when it comes to their health, and there's a lot of issues with viruses spreading around honeybees. But for folks that are beekeepers, it's important that they have the resources to be successful. So there are resources that the Bee Lab has available on our website. And then, letting people know things about honey that are frequently asked. So people, sometimes will ask, how do bees make honey? How long does honey stay good? What do I do if it crystallizes? Where can I buy honey? These are questions that you can expect to maybe hear from people as you're going about your pollinator ambassador volunteering.
Are there different city ordinances that will allow you or not allow you to have beehives in your yard?
Yep, there are, and we have a list of those ordinances on the Bee Lab websites.
Okay.
If people ask questions about ordinances, that's where I direct them to typically, but it's always good to double check, contacting someone from your city council or that's within, the management of your city to make sure that those ordinances are still valid or that nothing has changed since
Okay.
we updated the Bee Lab website. But yeah, generally when it comes to questions about beekeeping and honeybees and supporting bees, the best way to help all bees is by planting flowers, creating habitat.
Mhm.
You will also encounter a lot of questions, and not so much questions, but just opinions about wasps. Particularly towards the end of the summer when social wasp populations get really big and their food supplies are getting a little bit smaller. Those are often the times when we're hearing a lot from people about wasps. You might hear things like, I hate wasps. Not a question that people are asking. Asking questions about wasp nests. Yellow jackets will often nest in the ground. People are curious what to do about those nests. Generally some negative opinions or feelings about wasps. What's the difference between bees and wasps? when people are, asking questions or expressing their feelings about wasps, it's important to acknowledge that there definitely are lots of people that have had negative experiences with those large social wasp nests. But those social wasps, like yellow jackets and paper wasps, represent a really small percentage of all of the wasps that we have in Minnesota. Wasps are really diverse. Most of them are solitary, and they're really important in our ecosystems. They're also pollinators because they're moving some pollen around, but they also serve as pest control in our gardens because they are feeding really small pest insects to their young. So just anticipate that as you're volunteering, you will probably end up encountering lots of questions about wasps. So those are kind of some of the pretty common questions, that are usually a little bit more straightforward to answer, but we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the more difficult or complex questions that you might experience. What do you do when you don't know the answer to a question? Questions about pesticides are pretty complicated. And what about, what do you do when someone asks you to identify a bee or pollinator for them? Again, there's a full list of the difficult questions that you might receive while you're volunteering. That's in the Pollinator Ambassador Handbook, but we'll talk a little bit about some of those difficult questions right now. So what do you do when you don't know the answer to a question someone has asked? First of all, it's totally okay. It happens to us all the time. People have lots of really great questions in things that I haven't really considered. That's what's also really fun about doing this work is that people that have different backgrounds think about things in different ways and ask questions, that we haven't thought to ask or don't have the answers to. So don't panic if you don't know the answer to a question. There are a few ways that you can respond. You can say, I don't know the answer to the question. You can check out the Bee Lab website or other resources to try and find more information about that. The Bee Squad is also always available to ask questions or to answer questions through our email. You can always refer people to our team and our online resources to be able to answer questions for you. In terms of questions about shopping for plants, you'll definitely get lots of questions about making recommendations for various businesses like plant nurseries or pest control services and so on. Don't rake recommendations for shopping at certain businesses. That's not part of our role as pollinator ambassadors is to sort of advertise or be recommending certain businesses, but do make recommendations on what to look for when shopping for plants. So, for example, if someone is looking to put some pollinator habitat in their yard, recommending that when they're going to look for plants, it's important to look for plants or seeds that have not been treated with pesticides. Questions about pesticides are also very complicated and difficult to answer. We get a lot of questions from people at events along the lines of, how do I ask my neighbor to stop using pesticides? I've built this really beautiful pollinator garden and I don't want their pesticides to, contaminate the habitat that I've created. And these questions are also really difficult to answer. We do want you to give general information about pesticides and how they affect pollinators, but we want to avoid, telling people, or we want to avoid hearing people say things like, the University of Minnesota told me to tell you as my neighbor X, Y, and Z about pesticide use. So trying to, answer questions from the public about pesticides with as much sort of science-based information as possible. Another great way to kind of answer this question or talk to people about pesticides is by recommending having some sort of yard sign or signage with information about your pesticide-free garden and that the choices you've made in your yard are intentional with a goal of protecting pollinators. Maybe other people have never thought about it that way before. That's a great way to communicate with people about pesticides. Pollinator identification is another sort of difficult question area you might encounter while you're volunteering. It definitely happens to Elaine and I all the time. People might come up to you as you're tabling with pictures on their phone that they've taken of bees or other pollinators visiting flowers and, asking questions like, what bee is this? And it's okay to not know the answer. Even experts cannot always identify bees from photos. A lot of bees, in order to identify them to the genus or species level, need to be looked at under a microscope to figure out what they are. So it's totally okay to not know what pollinator you're seeing in a photo. A great way to answer this question is by recommending that they upload that photo to either iNaturalist or Bumblebee Watch. So we touched on iNaturalist just briefly this morning, as well as Bumblebee Watch when we were talking about collecting data. But these are these online platforms where people can upload observations of things that they see outside. On iNaturalist, verifications or IDs can be made by anybody that uses the app. And then on Bumblebee Watch, the bumblebee identifications are made just by experts. So that's a great place where people can go to get identification information about the pollinators that they're seeing in their yards or other spaces that they're visiting. So we are going to pause and do another brief discussion in breakout rooms. So the hypothetical situation here is that you are tabling at an event and someone approaches your table and asks, I don't have any gardening experience, but I'd like to create a pollinator garden in my yard. What should I plant? What I want you all to discuss in your discussion groups is how you would respond to this question. So I'm going to do the same thing we did earlier and open up those breakout rooms. I'll paste the question in the chat again, so you have a chance to talk about that. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice opportunity to chat with some new ambassadors that you didn't have a chance to talk to earlier. Would anybody like to share what you were able to discuss with your group about giving advice when it comes to creating pollinator habitat?
I'll share. This is Jadelle. Um, we brought up quite a few points. We talked until the last second, actually. One thing that was mentioned that I brought up to our group, and I often say when I'm presenting, is there is new information about what's called soft landings for pollinators underneath plantings for trees and shrubs. And for a long time, I've been talking to people, especially people that live in smaller spaces, that if they really want to make a big impact on pollinators when it comes to planting, to think about native trees and shrubs, because there's thousands of flowers versus maybe a few dozen in a perennial species or in a perennial plant. And now with the soft landing information, just talking about how to plant underneath the trees or shrubs that you're thinking about. And another person in the group brought up that think about what you are wanting to plant and then looking at, is it a shade area versus a sun area, and thinking about those plants, asking people what they were thinking about planting to kind of engage them more with what they're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great point. That idea of like, how can I maximize my small space that I can plant in? That's a great way to answer that question. And that just made me think too. Heather Holm did a really great talk for the Pollinator webinar series that Extension puts on every January, talking about soft landings. So I'm just going to put the recording of that in the Zoom chat if anybody's curious about learning more about those soft landings. Thanks, Jada.
Awesome. Thank you.
Martha, go for it. You go.
You go.
Okay. Jane made a good point in our group in that I'm sure a lot of us who've tabled before have experience, and that's just like going through a series of asking questions to try and gauge where their knowledge like really is. Like, do they know what type of soil they have? Like, do they have like a basic understanding of like super basic natives and things like that? And if it's really nothing at all, then like, providing materials and guidance on how to use the materials too is an extra step to take. and yeah, making sure they understand how to use what you're actually like providing them with. Um, I think Neil, you should mention your sacrificial garden because that was a fun topic.
Yeah, so planting things like parsley and dill, knowing that you're not going to harvest it, but it's a nice one for swallowtails. So thinking about some plants that you can put in there that you're not planning on eating, but just providing a little habitat for that. And it's a quick win because they're going to grow up and they're annuals and you won't have to wait 2 or 3 years for them to start to look pretty.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. The point about asking questions is so important. You know, it's always helpful to kind of meet people where they're at when you're talking about planting for pollinators. I mean, really any topic, but especially when they're trying to get more information. And Neil, I love that you call that a sacrificial garden. That's really great. That's an awesome way to help support butterflies in particular.
I was just going to emphasize the idea about asking people if they've thought about shrubs and trees, because I think people start off, they think they're going to plant a pollinator garden and they just think about um, flowers and grasses, and um, the trees and shrubs can be so impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. Trees and shrubs are a great way to, create forage for pollinators, especially kind of in the early spring, because there's some of the things that, trees bloom so early, and that early season food for pollinators is so important. So that's another great point to make.
And if you know about plant sales in your area, or like the soil and water folks at Beltrami has an annual tree and shrub sale, like knowing those resources that are very appropriate to the pollinators would help to have on your fingertips so you could help spread the word for those. And then as long as the lawns and the legumes continues to be funded, you could tell them that they can apply to help see if they can get grant money as well.
Yeah.
I think that one is really good. I have like a couple friends in the last few years, younger friends with like new homes and things like that, and they want to contribute, but they don't have experience, and so they do the lawns to legumes, and then they provide all of that education that goes along with it, which is definitely a helpful resource too.
Definitely. I think we can have time for one more person if anyone else wants to share.
Say our groups mentioned a lot of the things that have already been discussed already. One of the things, though, is being encouraging. Somebody said that just be excited for them, like, oh, this is going to be great, and it's okay to start small, and it's okay to fail. I mean, it's okay that plants will die, and sometimes you only learn by doing it, and that's okay. It's always um, everyone's space is different, and you also kind of need to ask the question about like how much time do they have, because that might determine also like what kind of project that they do first. Because if planting shrubs and trees can be a much less intensive process too than having to plant a whole pollinator garden.
Yeah, definitely. That's great.
I think it might be also a good idea to have a little card with or a QR code with some lists of people that can support you or resources that could support you, like Wild Ones or Homegrown National Park or Blue Thumb.
Mhm.
Oh, and also Doug Tallamy videos on YouTube.
Have to meet this guy.
I was gonna say too, not to be promoting, but Heather Holm, as Elise mentioned, she has some free PDFs on her websites for printing off for both common native bees and then also different planting recommendations, and they're very helpful because she goes through both soil types and then season for when things are blooming. So check those out.
Yeah, Heather Holmes' resources are amazing. All right, I think we're going to take another quick break here. 5-minute bio break, stand up, stretch your legs, step outside for a second, use the bathroom if you need to, and we'll be back at 2:35 to wrap up our last little bit of content talking about promoting inclusion in your volunteer work. We will see you back shortly.
All right, I am going to launch back in to our last bit of content here so we can get you out of here on time on with doing your other things. But we wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about inclusion in your volunteer work. So it's really our goal for this program. One of our big goals is, getting information to new audiences that we don't already reach and want to be mindful of reaching new audiences and being inclusive. So being aware of civil rights, which is a part of what we also, as a federally funded organization at Extension, we have need to be aware of understanding what civil rights are, why they're important, how they apply to you as a volunteer. So federal civil rights laws are set up to prohibit discrimination based on race, color, national origin, sex, including gender identity and sexual orientation, religious creed, disability, age, political beliefs, and also protection from reprisals, which we don't deal with that so much as volunteers, where we're dealing with people coming through, but we want to be aware of being inclusive, not only just prohibiting discrimination, but making sure that we're being intentional with being inclusive of people. So we want to make sure that all different members of our communities have equal access to the university and its resources. So in particular, focusing on making sure that we're supporting American Indian and other indigenous populations, people of color, including underrepresented groups and immigrant populations, people with both apparent and non-apparent disabilities. So being aware that we may not know what everyone is dealing with. We can't make assumptions based on what people look like, and people identifying as women also are still in need of particular inclusion, as well as people that have different gender identities and expressions. So these civil rights are important because they really can have long-lasting effects that are compounded. We need to kind of from the start try to be inclusive. So as volunteers for Pollinator Ambassadors, the expectations are that you will ensure that all participants feel welcome. So what this kind of, like non-discrimination based on sex looks like is making sure that there's not sex separate programs or activities or contests. Of course, no sexual harassment. Going beyond compliance to inclusion can be highlighting achievements of people who are women, ways that you can make people more aware of the important contributions of women. For non-discrimination based on race or national origin, again, making sure that that all people feel welcome. It can be important to be aware of implicit bias. There is, perhaps you can stick that in the chat, Elise. I like this test that can help you examine your own implicit bias, just to be aware of things before you're going out into the public. Beyond that, compliance, looking at inclusion, can be connecting with those underserved communities and asking communities how they want to be engaged, creating programs that serve their needs. So we can't assume that everyone that what they need, what they most want to do is making, ripping out their yard and putting in native plants. Maybe that's what we like doing, but maybe what they're looking for is more, we have a community garden. How do we make sure we have enough pollination happening here? There may be different needs. And so really just not making assumptions about what people want in different communities, but connecting with them. And so that we can provide information about pollinators, but in a way that will be most useful to different people. For accessibility, we want to reduce barriers to participation for those that are dealing with physical or mental limitations. So having strategies and ways that we're able to present materials, being aware of those needs and being adaptable, being able to provide accommodations when people need them. So beyond that kind of compliance to inclusion, would be kind of taking that next step of intentionally reaching out to those audiences and making sure that we are including them in what we're doing. So for in terms of this kind of compliance, making, this is having this public notification. So really when you're letting people know about what you're doing, making sure that you're trying to reach out to as many different communities as you can. And kind of the next step with this is taking a look at who's out in the audience and making efforts to reach out directly if you notice that there's people that are in your community, but you're not seeing them at your events. So here we have another discussion. So you are giving a talk at a local community garden that's interested in food production and wants to learn about pollinators. You know that not everybody is a native English speaker, so what can you do to make your presentation more accessible? And this is one, I think, Elise, where we're not going into breakouts. Are we just gonna
I think for the sake of time, we can
just
discuss as a
unpause
large group.
and yeah. Do people have ideas?
Maybe you could have an interpreter that would speak the language of a large number of the folks in your group that are not native English speakers.
Making sure materials at your table are also available in different languages too.
Yeah. I think you'd have to, in order to do some of these things, you'd have to partner with an organization that could provide you with some funds, like some grant money, because interpreters are expensive. And it's also, I've had to do that in my local garden where we did a survey and we needed to put it in 4 languages, and it was for a St. Paul park. And we needed $500 to pay for those translation services. So it's kind of takes a lot of foresight in order to achieve this to some degree.
I think something we've done also in the past in this Moorhead areas, going out of our way to invite, I guess even not out of your way, but just being intentional about inviting and including like our Indigenous Association and the Indigenous like education programs and things like that. I've had experience and they're just like so especially interested in natives and things like that. That's always fun.
Yeah, that's great. So we have had some, we were able to have some grant money that we're able to put towards some Spanish language translation. So that's kind of the start of what we've done with having these material, our Pollinator Ambassadors material. Susan also said something about providing examples of foods that people can hold and see and smell. So, taking advantage of kind of those like visual representations that we can share as well. All right. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving along so we can all get on with our days. So I did want to also briefly mention the supplementary modules. Elise has mentioned these a little bit, but we have developed these modules to get into these more kind of complex issues. We've talked about pesticides being kind of a complicated issue, and we do get lots of questions. So the module that we have developed for pesticides is based on, our current scientific information. These are things that we're, keeping an eye on, and we'll keep updated with new research as things come out. But really, these are intended to really give you more background information, so you're able to handle those more complex questions. We have another module that's about climate. Same kind of idea where we have summarized the research and have information for you about climate change in general, as well as how climate change is impacting pollinators. We have another module that's about policy. So we haven't talked about that much today, but that is another great way that people can take action to help their their pollinators. So this module covers policy at, from federal, state, down to community level policy for things that can impact pollinators and how to be involved. There is one about science communication. So resources for helping you to communicate those complex scientific topics to help reach broad audiences. We have a new one we just added about the rusty patch bumblebee. So this is an endangered species that we're lucky to have here in Minnesota still. So we have a module that digs into the information there. This is a bee that you may get more questions about, as many people have heard about the rusty patch bumblebee. But it's also one that not everybody knows about, and it can be really exciting to let people know. Depending where they are in the state, they might have an endangered species living in and visiting their pollinator gardens, living in their yards. We also have another new one that's the latest buzz on bee research. So this one covers bee research topics, a lot of stuff that we've been doing here at the Bee Lab, but also beyond. So just kind of some latest findings and interesting things coming out about pollinators. And that is the end of our official training. I'm going to pass it off to Elise, who has a few more things to share.
Awesome.
And I mean, also, if anyone has questions about anything, we
Yeah, I
didn't really
think
pause for questions,
I'll go
but
through this really quick, and then we'll have a couple minutes for questions. Um, Thank you so much, everybody, for taking so much time to join us today. Just to kind of summarize everything we went over, I just wanted to go back to some of the things we talked about this morning to again reiterate what next steps are after finishing this training. Apply for Pollinator Ambassadors if you haven't already, so we can get that application link in the chat for you once more. Again, that form is to just give us a little bit of a sense of kind of where you're at, what your background is, what you already might know about pollinators, and where you're based. And once you fill out that form, that's how we can get you access to Canvas. Make sure you're registered for training in Canvas. So I know many of you that are in this Zoom today have already applied for the program and have access to Canvas, but applying will make sure you get that access. So then complete the rest of the training modules. So again, what we covered today is modules 1, 2, and 3, but the rest of the required modules 4 through 13 have the rest of the information about the Pollinator Toolkit and have quizzes that go with them. After you finish those quizzes, then you can complete the cumulative exam. And when you pass the cumulative exam, you'll do your practice 5-minute presentation for Elaine and myself. And then you are officially a pollinator ambassador. We will send you a short liability form that you complete to sort of finish out your volunteering. In that liability form, there will be a question that asks for the secret code word affirming that you've completed all of your training. And that secret code word is SCOPA, which is the word that refers to those pollen collecting hairs that bees might have on their legs or underside of their bellies. So when you see that volunteer pledge and liability form, ask for a secret code word. You can put SCOPA in there. We'll do questions. I just want to put this up on the screen and in the chat really quickly before I forget. We would love some feedback on how this training went today. We would love your thoughts on what you liked, what you didn't like. We're always trying to improve this program. We started doing this iteration of Pollinator Ambassadors in 2024, so it still is a relatively new program. So we're still learning a lot with you all, and we would love your feedback. So if you're able to get to that survey soon, that would be super helpful. I'll put our contact information up. So if you have more questions after today about applying for the program or as you're going through the material in Canvas, you can definitely send either of us an email or post in Canvas or send a message there as well. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is there a time frame to complete modules 4 through 13 and the speech?
Nope, there's no time frame. You can complete the training materials at your own pace. Some people work through them really quickly. Some people kind of fit them in when they've got time. So we're not limiting. We're not telling you need to complete them within any sort of time frame.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for participating in this training today. It was great to meet lots of you. We are so grateful for the time that you spend as you're volunteering as a pollinator ambassador as well. We will stick around for a little bit here to answer some final questions, but there's more information about the program on our website as well.
It's time to get busy with the bees.
And there are, someone was asking about quizzes for the first 3 modules. There are quizzes associated with those as well.
You went over really quickly. How do I get to the slideshows again to get in? They're on Canvas, you said?
Yeah, there's access to the virtual Pollinator Toolkit in Canvas.
Do you remember how to get there?
Let me look. I believe it's in the first module, but I will double check right now. Yeah, in module 1, there's a link to the virtual Pollinator Toolkit.
Module 1. Okay, thank you.
So if I signed up for this training today, am I already signed up for to apply to be a pollinator ambassador, or do I need to do that separately on Canvas?
So the application is like a Google form that's on our website, and after you fill out the application, that's when you'll get access to Canvas.
Okay.
I'll just stick it in the chat again, so it's just right there too.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And at least I don't know if I ever got registered for Canvas. I was struggling 3 or 4 times, so I don't know if I'm registered.
Let's touch base sometime next week, and we can figure out how to make sure you can get into Canvas.
All right. Do you want to send me an email or something?
Yep, I can send you an email.
Thank you.
This is maybe just a little bit off topic, but I actually was presenting the other night and had some questions about the history of bees in Minnesota. And I had looked some things up, and of course, the things that I found were related to the University of Minnesota and how they begun the program of honeybee keeping. I couldn't find a lot about native bees other than just what you have done, Elaine, and then a few other tidbits here and there. Do either of you have good resources for looking up some history on just like native bee research?
So particularly in Minnesota?
Yeah. The program was focused on Minnesota, especially, and
Yeah.
then we talked a lot about native bees and then beekeeping in Minnesota. But then, yeah, the question
Yeah.
came up about the history of
Yeah.
research of
It's
native
not
bees.
a very long history, so
Sure, yeah, that
um
makes
I did my I did both my master's and my PhD here at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Entomology. But Marla Spivak, a honeybee professor, was my professor because there was no native bee professor.
yeah.
And so it wasn't until they hired Dan Caraveau in Dr. Dan Caraveau in like
I think it was,
2017
yeah, I
or
think it was
16, somewhere in
2017.
there. He was the first native bee professor
I
that we
was gonna
had
say I
here.
saw his name, but yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of information. So I was just curious if there was any
Yeah,
place
yeah.
to look
So
for more.
so there are native bee people kind of squeezing in with the honeybee world because yeah, Marla, even though she's a honeybee researcher, she's interested in all bees. So she was supportive of people who wanted to study other bees as well. But yeah, it's there's not a long history. It doesn't go back 100 years like the honeybee program does.
Another piece, not from the university, that I think is really fun to highlight is so in 2023, Zach Portman, who's the taxonomist at the Bee Lab, published this checklist of Minnesota bees, and he documented there are over 500 species of bees found across Minnesota from work that we were doing at the Bee Lab and DNR people were doing to kind of document the different species. And that was the first time that checklist of the bees in Minnesota had been published since I think 1918. And the list in 1918 had like 66 species in it. So it was like 500 species pretty much that had been documented over the last 100 years. Which I think that's pretty cool, and that really I think also emphasizes that point that the history of native bee research in Minnesota is not that long.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff
That's
that's
amazing.
growing too. So even when we put in the list when we started compiling it a while ago was like 417 for a while, 425, and there was a lot of work that was done by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources going around the state in their biological survey program, doing a lot of documentation of bees that we were able to grow that list through all these partners who started getting out there and actually looking for the bees. And having a taxonomist that can identify them is key.
I was just looking at the entomology faculty, and I mean, someone like Dan Caraveau, do you guys know about him, who does conservation and restoration of wild bee communities, native?
Yeah, so he's in the bee lab here. So
Okay.
yeah, yeah, we work closely with Dan.
Okay, well that's really wonderful. And Vera, I think is it Krishik as well?
Yeah, Vera Krishik
Yeah.
does more work on kind of like pesticide impacts. Yeah,
Okay. So there, what information they would have, you would have in your materials.
correct.
Okay, great. Great, great, great. Well, should be fun.
Yeah, I hope so.
I still have a question that I don't think got answered that maybe other people have. I'm really interested on research that says like what nativars, which nativars like are most useful for pollinators? Like, have there been studies that say, like, if I'm working with somebody who wants to put in not a red twig dogwood, but wants to put in Arctic fire or red gnome, like, which one of those two nativars is the better choice because it's still well suited to certain pollinators? Like, is there a resource guide to that kind of information somewhere?
Not very complete from what I've seen. So I was just digging into that again when I was getting this ready for this presentation. There are, there's so many different cultivars, so many different things that people do. There are, a handful of studies that do comparisons, with subsets of things. So, if you want to get yeah, there's research that maybe covers, from what I was looking at, there were maybe, like 20 or 40 of the different of the, 1,000 cultivars out there that there's information on. But I'd be happy to share those those resources that I found, those papers that I found that were examining that to, maybe it'll have the specific thing someone is interested in.
One thing that I keep thinking about, because in my own neighborhood, we've had several houses that people from California have moved into. And I do know that up in the Duluth area and the Grand Rapids area, that there are a lot of lots up there that have been purchased by people from outside of Minnesota. And so we're going to have people immigrating into Minnesota that don't know anything about the plants here or the bees or whatever. And it seems like we should be keeping an eye on for the future of your program in terms of the changes in the demography around the state, because some places like Duluth are going to get hit hard. They're expecting thousands of people up there. And if there are any bee issues up there, then you're going to have to reach out to people who know probably very little, about well, certainly the habitats here, let alone the bees and that sort of thing. So we're going to have to go way well beyond what you're doing right now, I think, with climate change as an issue.
Yeah, I think our program will continue to change over time as needs and things change and as we continue to learn more about, pollinators and what people want to learn about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I guess what I'm thinking is that these new people who come in may not even know what questions to ask about pollinators, and it's going to take entirely different tact to figure out what to do with this program for people who are a different culture. And it's probably going to happen pretty darn fast. I would bet you within, the time that you've existed, that they're changing up north already. I already know that from people who are trying to buy property up there, and it's just getting snapped up right and left near Grand Rapids by people from outside the state.
On that same note, you go to the local nurseries now and they still sell things like the invasive species of grasses
Yep.
and different things. What's being done to educate or try and conform, the sales of these things? Because like Sharon just said, people are not educated and the word's not getting out there. We're still planting burning bush and different things like that. What the invasive species, what can we do? What can be done?
And that's the policy end of things. And I think it's an area that actually I think this program should, I don't even know if it should be mentioned because it's far beyond what any regular person in the city can do. I mean, I tried to do that at the state on green infrastructure for the state. And I mean, it went nowhere after 25 years, for God's sake. Trying to save and protect land and water resources in our state that were high quality resources. And the legislators just, other than Tom Ostoff and Steve Morris, they were about the only two that even understood what in the world we were talking about at the Department of Natural Resources. So keeping this active at the very local level with people, who really want to make a difference in their neighborhoods and whatever, I think is the way to go, as opposed to getting too big with it. Just really try to one-on-one small space and just incrementally move along.
Yeah, I think that's a great strength of this program is, getting in and talking with people one on one.
Yeah, a small space, move, 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 move. Yeah, things move that way. But when you try to do too big and too much, and it just confuses people, and they're so overloaded now. I mean, they don't even know how to drive.
It's been a while since there's many parts. Minnesotans in general are not the best drivers.
Well, we are past 3 o'clock, so I want to be sensitive of people's time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It was wonderful to meet all of you and have some great conversations and hear be able to answer questions. We hope to see you all in the future and we'll be in
Yeah,
touch.
we try to do, we don't have it. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, we'll be in touch as events come up.
Yeah. And we also
Wonderful.
try to do some regular check-ins to have other opportunities to just get together and answer questions about things too. So those are a little bit haphazard with how they come up, but we will there will be other opportunities to come together and as a group and meet other pollinator ambassadors that have gone through training before as well.
And drink honey
Thank
with
you.
tea or
Thank
tea
you
with
much.
honey. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.